not refer to it that way. So anyone who was misled into thinking I was suggesting there was something like F4 I should not use that term. There's nothing to suggest that anything wrong.
Yeah, what's
that? So I apologize to both Deputy Chief Commissioner and Captain for using that term. Secondly, just as a process note, since we moved Deputy Chief Wilhelmi in as a finalist for this position, we have received from the committee all of the written materials that we've received from other chiefs. So we got that since our last meeting. Process for our discussion tonight. We're going to move right in to our whatever deliberation discussion we need to do and a vote on the position. Hopefully that will be done before 7:05, which is our next appointment. To the extent there is any time left after that discussion vote between then and 7:05, I will entertain public comments, questions. I'm going to try to avoid kind of further relitigation of the decision. So to the extent that you want to weigh in substantively on the choice, I prefer you not ask questions about what we decided, why we decided, all that is good game. But I'd rather not reopen the discussion that we had. I think we've had a lot of kind of input at this point, and a lot of sources, and so I think on that. We'll use that discussion time to talk about where we go from here. Questions, concerns, I'm happy to entertain criticism of the selectmen. Less happy to entertain criticism of the search committee. But that's how we proceed. So with that, I think we'll start kind of in our usual order. That'll be the ground rules for how we proceed in our discussion today. So with that, I think we'll start discussion just in the order. Audience. Suggestions from Medfield TV.
So I guess I'll start by just describing the process that I went through as a selectman with regard to this whole topic. We got this material from the committee, the search committee, on the Friday before our Tuesday meeting last week. And so I spent the weekend scouring this material, trying to figure out what was going on and why we were getting the recommendations of the Friday before our Tuesday. So that was just really a lot of study of the report. Interesting material, and I've certainly learned a lot. I've learned even more in the last week. After we had those two long meetings on Tuesday and Wednesday last week, and since then, there have probably been 50 to 75 emails that I've gotten about this topic. And there was the online change.org petition with about 300 signatures on it from Medfield residents. I would estimate that the touches that I've had have been in favor of John Wilhelmi about 4 to 1. I've also had telephone calls. I've had contacts with the search committee members. I've done a lot of thinking. I've conferred with people that I like to confer with. I've talked to people. And then I tried to imagine who would I want to be our chief if we had one of those never events, if we had, God forbid, an active shooter at our school. And I guess I focused on a couple things there. Possible prevention of it, possible legal liability for the town. With regard to the search committee, it was an impressive group of people that came together. A lot of law enforcement background, HR and personnel people. I'm very impressed, and they have a talented and remarkably professional group. I think the process was way more thorough and diligent than I thought searches were. I don't do searches, and so I just see the results of them every this is the third one I guess that I've seen maybe as a selectman. So I don't see them very often. The committee described the steps very nicely for us. I got corrected by Gus the last time we met about the fact that I thought the assessment center was maybe a little subjective, and he informed me that he does them and singular objective. So then getting down to John Wilhelmi. I think that John was afforded a special consideration and opportunity in the process, clearly, because he didn't make the cut according to our committee. And we're now taking another look at him. And we're doing that because of the fact that he has this remarkable record in our town of 40 years of service to us. And because we all respect him so much and we like him. I guess I come down to the fact that our committee has indicated that there was a significant disparity between the candidates. I'm sort of tied because I'm not allowed to talk about what's in the report. But for me, I have decided that my goal is to get the best possible police chief for the town of Medfield. For me, that means the best experienced, the most knowledgeable, and not just the chief with whom I feel the most comfort. And for me, that's ultimately the king, Michelle Barrett. So that would be where my vote is.
Okay, I'm not going to keep you in suspense. I concur with Pete, but I've asked you to listen to me for a couple of points. We weren't going to make a mistake tonight. You need to understand it. We were not going to make a mistake. The issue was not, do we have a good candidate and a bad candidate, and which one is which? It was, we have two good candidates, and the question for me, and I think for all three of us, was which of these two candidates is better? And better is partly got to do with qualifications and background and experience, and that distributes out across both candidates. Certainly, Captain Durrett has some pretty intriguing experience in her career, but we have Chief Wilhelmi with direct experience here. So that fits on both sides. I alluded in our last meeting that I was trying to think about where, not just who's most qualified, but given a situation, and I guess like Pete, the place where my head went was two possibilities. One possibility is Medfield stays a sleepy, quiet, peaceful town for the next, and I was thinking 5 to 10 years is just the time frame. Medfield stays a sleepy, quiet, peaceful town. Nothing much happens. It's pretty much the way it's been, and it's predictable, and we've got the routine down. And then there's what I think of in my practice or my business as the low probability, high impact event. I don't know what that might be. You know, everybody talking about active shooters. That's fine. I personally am more worried about some sort of an infrastructure attack that actually just doesn't hit one town but hits a lot. That makes sense to me. That could be something. But I don't know what it is. The point is, it's something that we don't know about, and the question is, how do you prepare for it? And that was something that I thought Captain Durrett would be in a better position to handle. So that's that. I wanted to bring up a point that was made, because I want to challenge it. The comment was made, I think, on the Wednesday night meeting that people don't deserve a promotion because he's been here for 40 years, and it would be an insult if we didn't promote him. No one deserves a promotion because they've been somewhere for 40 years.
They do deserve consideration for having been here for 40 years, and I can tell you that as I was thinking about Chief Wilhelmi, I was not thinking about, well, he's been here for 40 years, I guess we should give it to him. I was thinking in terms of, to be honest with you, I was thinking in terms of what those members of the police department that were in the room on Wednesday night and Tuesday night and tonight, at least some of you are here again. I thought about what you said about him. The reason it was a hard decision was because what you said about him and what you said he has done to contribute to your development, issues of honesty and all that, that's a given, but that piece of it and the hard work, that's all there. That's not in question. If he deserved it, it would have been because of what he did over those 40 years, not the 40 years that he happened to be here. So I want to be clear on that. Not being promoted is not an insult. if we thought that was an insult, that would so devalue 40 years of service to this town, it would be a crime. Not maybe a chargeable crime, but it would be a crime. When you do or don't get promoted, there's reasons why that happens. Some of them have to do with your qualifications. Some of them have to do with the circumstances. I can tell you that the circumstances weighed in my thinking, and for anybody who wonders, I asked for a night to sleep on it. I'm glad we didn't meet like the next morning. It took me 3 nights. Saturday morning, I finally woke up and decided I had kind of gotten somewhere. The situation, one piece of it is that disastrous thing. The other situation, I looked back and thought about our chiefs since before I moved to town in 1995 and realized that our police chief has always been someone, and all the time I've been here, has always been someone from Medfield. Recognize Chief Meany wasn't in the police department when he became chief, but he was a Medfield person. And for all those decades, we haven't had a fresh set of eyes thinking about things. Now, I wouldn't have just gone to bring somebody strange in, but because I was impressed with Captain Garrett, I think that will be a good thing for this town. I found myself looking at her background and the development and the training jobs that she has done. I'll tell you right out right now, I hope Chief Wilhelmy will stay. So I'm hoping he has a decision, and I understand it can be tough, but if you want to know what I hope happens, I hope he stays and he keeps doing the things that he's been doing, and that you all benefit from that, because not only do you have a deputy chief or a chief who's helping contribute to your development, but you have a second person who also has a different set of experience that may bring some things in that you'd never get exposed to if she weren't here. And so that's kind of where I came out on all this. I am completely satisfied, and in fact, I congratulate the search committee on the rigor, the competence, the objectivity that they brought to the table. So I would echo, if you want to, I knew going into this that with the responses and the recommendations I got, everybody would love to be able to make everybody or give everybody what they want. And I knew that wouldn't happen. And like Pete, I heard more from people who are in favor of Chief Wilhelmy than Captain Garrett. That doesn't totally surprise me, but when you're someone who would rather have everybody smiling at you, it's not a lot of fun to contemplate all the people that will tell you exactly how dumb they think you are. I would echo Mike's comment, though. You want to throw stuff at us. This committee did a bang-up job. They did what they were asked to do. I am totally satisfied since last week's meeting that this committee did, in fact, seriously consider Chief Wilhelmy, appropriately considered him, and thoroughly considered him, and that the results that they came up with are the result of their assessment, not through neglect or anything else. With that, let me turn it over.
Well, the function of the order in which we speak sort of renders this as sort of academic at this point. So I've got, and I'm going to join my colleagues in supporting Captain Garrett for this position. I think she deserves unanimous endorsement of the board as she starts as our police chief. But I wanted to note a couple of things. I think we took a fairly extraordinary step over significant objections from the committee, which included 3 of our department heads, to move John Wilhelmy into the final here. And it's not like it's a prize, it's not a reward, and I think I would echo what Pete and Gus said, and obviously I spoke to this last Wednesday. You know, it is a sign of our respect that we went over a committee's recommendation to continue to consider him. And I thought it was important, and this is something that I thought throughout the process, that, you know, given his service to the town, not just as a reward for 40 years, but given his success as a police officer, as the acting chief, that the decision about him ought to be made by the Board of Selectmen, right? It would have been easier simply to say, well, the committee gave us this recommendation, our hands are tied, and they said a bunch of stuff, it's all confidential, we can't tell you what it is, but, you know, and I have great confidence in the people on the committee and the work that it did, but I thought it was important that we in public consider him, and so everyone knows that he was considered. And it's not as a token, right? It's not a bone throw. I mean, this was, I think, for all of us, an extraordinarily difficult decision to reach this point. And I think if we had gotten a call at 5:30 that Captain Garrett had withdrawn, I think probably we'd all feel good about making John Wilhelmy the police chief. And I think And a couple of other things, two other points that really come through in, I don't know if 50 to 75 is the number, I might have gotten more, I'm not sure, but two things come through in many of the comments that were made kind of looking forward. First is we need to think better as a town, and as a town I mean as a Board of Selectmen and town government, about what the path for development and advancement is for our officers and our police department. And that is not a question that has been put on the table for us before. It's not a question that's come up kind of in our annual budgeting discussion with respect to the police department. But it is something we need to seriously look at and think about. And that's got to come not just from the next police chief, it's got to come from us. And making sure that even this is going to be a small department, there's always going to be limits. But what that is, and make sure in addition to looking at the budget line number of, okay, here's what the police operations budget is, here's the head count, that seems good for a town our size, really thinking about what that all means for development. And I think I really appreciate that. The second thing that comes out in so many of the messages that I read is the extent to which people in this town value the close relationships they've had with town employees and town officials over the years, right? I mean, selectmen, elected officials, we kind of come and go for the most part, except for Pete and Ann Thompson. But for the most part, we kind of come and go. But, you know, the department heads, the employees, the police officers, the firefighters, I mean, these folks have made a long-term commitment and investment in the town. And I think the challenge for us in town hall, the challenge for Christine as the town administrator, the challenge for our new department heads, and our key department heads have all completely turned over now over the last 6 years, is to work to to build those relationships and have those relationships. And I would not have, I think, as you probably all saw from Captain Garrett's interview, I think she wants to have that. I think she wants to have that kind of relationship, not just with police officers, but with the town. You know, and I heard again and again from people, well, you know, John Wilhelmi is Medfield, and I agree, right? I mean, he is Medfield. He is someone who has been a pillar of this community for 40 years. But I think all of our department heads should be working, and our employees should be working also to be Medfield, so that when people look 5 years from now, 8 years from now, and think about the people we've hired over the last few years and say they also personify what this community is about and what we value, right? Because we've lost a lot, both in retirement. We've obviously lost a lot with losing Mike Sullivan, but what all of those people embodied, those department heads embodied, Bill Kingsbury, Bob Meany, is an accessibility to the community, an interest in the community, a closeness with the people in the community. And I think that's still the standard that we want to set from this table, from that office, as we have all these new department heads. And so that is something that for us to work at and to keep emphasizing, because that is an important priority. We can get focused on, you know, what is this procedure or what is that procedure. And I agree with Gus. I think with her experience, you know, Captain Garrett will bring a fresh set of eyes to the stuff that we do. I think it will help us and advance the department, making the kind of incremental, not radical changes that we probably need. And I also agree with Gus. I really much hope that Deputy Chief Wilhelmi stays, but that's obviously up to him. But I think we all need to work on having those relationships and hiring people who want to build those relationships with people in the town, because it's not then just about being an employee. You get a paycheck, you come in. Clearly, that's not the way John Wilhelmi has conducted himself over the last 40 years. It's not the way Mike Sullivan conducted himself, or Bill Kingsbury, or Bob Meany, Ken Feedy. These guys all put in many, many more hours than were required by contract, and you never really heard, okay, you know, time is up at 5:12. We have to leave now, and we're done. And so I think those are the two comments I would make and on what's come through this process. I really do appreciate everything everybody has written, everything everybody has said for the most part. I appreciate the input, the thoughtfulness that so many people put into it to write to us about this topic. And I'm confident we're making a good decision. I think that this will be good for the town. I understand that a lot of people this will be painful for a lot of people who very much wanted John Wilhelmi to get this job, and I'm not going to try to talk you out of the way you feel about it. And it's a sign of the respect that you all have for him, that we all have for him. And I think that in time, I hope that you'll all be as happy with our decision as I think we are in making it now. So I think with that, we should make a formal motion. I think the motion should be to offer the position to Michelle Garrett, subject to working out a contract with the town administrator and to completing a full background check.
Is there a third thing? It's just those two? No,
It was a
no physical.
background check. I don't know if she has a physical or anything like that.
And pre-employment physical.
Pre-employment physical, full background check,
Okay.
employment agreement.
So I move that we extend an offer of employment as police chief to Captain Garrett, subject to ability to negotiate an appropriate contract, passing a background check, and passing a physical.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Yep.
Aye. All right, so it is 6:33. We've got 32 minutes until our next appointment, roughly, if my math is correct. So if anyone would like to comment, questions.
Could I just make a comment
I'm
before,
sorry.
before
You
you
can
open
start
it up?
making comments, Pete.
I guess I'd just like to address the police officers in the room, because I'm very appreciative of all the information that you have shared with us, and I certainly have learned a lot, and I'm hoping that we can kind of work together to try to solve some of these issues that you've raised in terms of the ability for advancement and other things that you've mentioned. I think that's important for the town to look at. That was all new to me. That's one of the benefits of, I guess, of going through this process. I'm hoping that in the future, the selectmen will be more informed about what's going on in the police department. So thank you for your input.
Yes, Mr. Harney, just get a microphone down to Mr. Harney. Oh, it's coming.
Now, it's difficult in light of what you just, all three of you have said, to imagine that you really heard the community, or really are willing to pay attention to the community. You know, the community agrees that the committee worked hard. It remains a question as to whether they should have ever been asked to embark on a world search for a new chief for this town that we value so much. All the words that you've just said will never offset the simple fact that you have ignored what people in the town of Medfield have communicated to you in sound numbers, perhaps overwhelming numbers. And it doesn't matter what was said, what particular words were said about 44 years or 40 years at the meetings we've had. All the semantics and all the wordplay doesn't change the fact that John Wilhelmi has been dedicated and has been more than competent, has been promoted at every possible chance, from patrolman to sergeant to administrative sergeant to deputy chief to acting chief. And now we have somebody better that we really don't know. We can't balance John's experience here, knowledge of the town. This is a small town. You bring big, extraneous, not relevant aspects to your search. I mean, he's proven leadership in the department. The officers told you that. And it's terribly, terribly sad that you three have now decided that you are right, and that all of the people who contacted you, who know him, who have worked with him, the officers who came, and it's not easy for an officer in this town to come up and challenge the Board of Selectmen, but they did time and time again. And you sit there and somehow rationalize that you're right. Well, you're wrong. You're wrong. You're not appointing a chief that the town knows, and a chief who knows the town. And it's really regrettable. And I just, you know, the smugness with which you present this to us should not be tolerated by the community. It may have to tolerate it, but then again, it may not. Anyone else want to?
Thank you, John. I don't know that I detect any smugness in our comments, but if that's your perception, I'm not going to
Oh,
argue with your
just
perception.
the self-assurance, and you just are wrong on this, fundamentally wrong on it.
Okay.
You can't see that, you know? You approach this whole week and a half now with a certainty in your own wisdom. And believe me, it's flawed.
Well, I would suggest, John, and I don't really want to get into a debate about this because I don't think you're going to, you don't think you want to get into a debate about it. I mean, I think the biggest sign of the certainty of our wisdom is that we overruled the unanimous recommendation of a committee to move John to the final. And so if we were, so certain in that, I mean, I don't understand that comment. I mean, I understand you disagree with it. I don't expect you to agree with it. But I think the notion that we didn't think this through in detail and that we're somehow sitting here pronouncing from on high that we knew better than everybody, I mean, ultimately, this is obviously the judgment that we've made. And if you want to change the charter to make the police chief an elected official, we could do that and try that. But I reject the notion that we're being smug about this or condescending about this. And, it's not as though the only comments we got on this were in one direction. And obviously the recommendation from the people who looked the closest at this and have great commitment and love to the town and law enforcement experience themselves was in the other direction. So I think there's a measure of intellectual humility in that as well.
They looked at it, Mike, as I said at the high school meeting, they looked at it from a textbook perspective. They didn't look at it from who's the best person for the town of Medfield, who knows the town, and who is best known by the town. You're bringing in a woman who gave us a wonderful presentation at the interview, but she's coming from a city of 200,000 people. The policing, as you've been told by the patrolmen in town here, is much different there than it is in Medfield. We've got, 8,000, 9,000 adults in the town. It's just totally wrong to ignore what you've ignored and to go ahead. And I understand you want to back a committee you set up, and they want to be backed up. But that is not a good outcome for this particularly important position in the town.
All right, thank you.
And you're so, the three of you are just so certain of your own infallibility that we're going to have to live with it. Perhaps we'll have to live with it.
John, I would assure you that I'm not certain of.
I don't want to hear it.
Okay, thank you.
All right, in the back there, please.
I can come up here.
Oh, okay, let that.
Can I go? I was trying to wait patiently. My name is Rebecca, and I wanted to go over two kind of distinct things, respect and trust. So first of all, I respect the service that John Wilmey, I'm a little nervous, that he has given to this town by his dedication, by all of the people that have supported him. And I think that it is admirable that we have had such a longstanding servant to our town. And I respect all of the people on the committee that sacrificed their time and their efforts to go through all this process, because it takes a lot to take time away from your family and to really go into this process in dedication and service to the town. And I think we don't give enough credit to people who are serving our town, especially in these kind of volunteer situations. And I want to say that I also trust in the committee's findings, and that while we're not privy to everything that was in the findings, that we have to trust that they did a really good job and they vetted all of these candidates and they did a service to our town. And we don't have all of the information, but I trust in them and all of their backgrounds to make sure they're working together to find the best candidate. And I'm trusting my elected officials of this Board of Selectmen to make the decision for the best interest of my town. And that's why I am thankful for the decision that you made to extend the offer to Captain Michelle Gret, because I believe we do need a fresh perspective in this town. As someone who moved to Medfield 6 years ago, I was an outsider. I wasn't even from New England. And one of the things that I loved about this town is the welcome and the open arms that I received from so many of my neighbors, from the community, and I really do believe that we can rise above and we can do that again, and we can do that to our new police chief. So I just want to say that, so thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Paul?
Paul Hinckley. All I want to say is, I know you all did the best you could, but there was only one thing that went wrong. That if the committee had thrown John in with the other two and went before you at the school, and all of them were heard, then you could have said, okay, she's came across a lot better. Everybody would have walked away happy because at least he would have had his chance in front of you speaking and the group. And if he lost, then so be it. You know what I mean? And everybody would have been a winner. They would have done their job, you would have done your job you picked. But that was the only main thing that in further committees, if you were going to hire a person and at least have the one in charge come before you, and then you can say, well, we just happened to found a better person. But that didn't happen. They didn't put him in before you. If they did, there'd be no discussion right now, because you still could have picked her and you would have all walked away and everybody would have said, oh, well, that was the best one. But you didn't give him a chance in front of you. That's all.
Understood. Thanks, Paul. Other comments?
I guess.
No? All right. Well, if there are no further comments, I think we're done with this portion of the meeting. And
Can I say
you can say whatever you'd like, Gus.
I'm addressing the police too. You all, by showing up in these meetings, certainly helped me, and I suspect all three of us kind of know you in a deeper way than we did before. And as I was thinking about this, at the time I was trying to figure out which way to go. I was thinking back in my own life when I was younger, and I was thinking about a couple of people that they were not I'm not talking about my father. I'm talking about people that at different points in my life played a very important role for me in totally different ways. But they showed up in a certain point. They basically made a contribution to my life that was defining. Maybe somebody else would have done it, something different, but they did what they did, and that led me in many ways in the directions that I went, and I am deeply appreciative of them. They mean a whole lot to me. And I put myself in, I think, your shoes in a sense, because I said, if someone came along and there was some competition for a job, and my circumstances were different, but if somebody came along and there was a competition for a job and one of those two people was under consideration for it, and anybody could have possibly considered doing anything different, I would have been hacked. So if you are hacked, I get that at least, even though it may be directed here. It would have been worse than hacked, but it's a public meeting and it's on TV. You should at least know that I went through that thought process. I basically couldn't rationalize my way out of being really hacked off. But you ought to know that as I was thinking about that in this particular circumstance, a bigger factor in my thinking, this will probably get you even angrier because it's partly of what you said and partly of what I heard, but a factor in my thinking around this had to do with what Mike brought up, that we're not doing enough deliberately and in any kind of an organized way to provide development paths, especially for the police. And a factor in my thinking around my decision had to do with the fact that I actually think that Captain Garrett will be someone who is going to open up some opportunities for you from a development standpoint that you wouldn't have been exposed to if we had stayed as a small, close-knit town. I don't expect you to buy that from me right now. If I'm right, I'm hoping 12 months from now, some of you will say, you know what? I didn't think about this. Actually, this is getting more interesting. May not happen, but I hope it does. So, for what that's worth.
Others? Anyone else? Okay, well, barring further comments, since we are in the meeting, we should probably move on and do some of the other items on the agenda. We have a 7:05 appointment with the Kingsbury Club that we have to wait to 7:05 to have. We have a warrant hearing at 7:30, which we have to wait to 7:30 to have. So what do we want? We have no consent agenda.
You want to open the town meeting warrant?
Yeah, let's move to open the town meeting warrant. So just as a preliminary, we are moving to open the town meeting warrant to add an additional article, just in case we end up in a situation where we have to be the warrant committee or another board is proposing a budget that would require an override if passed. We are still working to get the budgets under a number so we don't have to have one. Administratively, we have to open the warrant to add it, and so that's what we'll do. This is not an announcement that we will be proposing a budget that requires an override this year. We have to do this administratively at this point, and then we will close it at the end of the meeting. So if we could have a motion from the clerk.
I move that we open the 2019 annual town meeting warrant.
Second?
All in favor?
Yep.
Aye. All right, the warrant is now open. Do we have anything we need to cover under the budget review and discussion? And we have a bunch of stuff on the list there. I don't know how much of this we want to do with the warrant committee versus
One thing
on our own.
One thing I had hoped to do, but Christine sent me some updated numbers, and I had hoped to be able to come in today with a pro forma. If the idea, in following up on the discussion we had Wednesday night with Mike, where the selectmen would issue an approved kind of guidance around those 5 blocks relative to the revenues. If you can give me until next Tuesday, I'll have that, and I should be able to get that turned into sooner. There were a couple changes to the numbers that seemed like maybe they were going in a good direction, so I didn't want us to go I didn't want to put pro forma guidance at one level and then find out it's not quite as austere as it might have looked, so I just need a little more time.
Are you, having opened the warrant, were you going to add a specific article or articles?
We did, we're gonna add, an article regarding the override.
Okay, so that's referenced.
Yes. I think technically we have to leave it open until the end of the meeting.
I understand, I just didn't hear, I heard you open the warrant, I didn't hear the article being inserted.
Does that require a vote?
A further motion to insert an additional article?
I move that we insert an additional article, thank you, Mark, additional article in the warrant to cover the possibility that we will need to have an override article similar to what we had last year.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Had you finished your previous thought?
Yeah, I just was hoping I'd be able to give you those numbers, and I don't have them yet.
All right. Cemetery fee and transfer station sticker fee, Mo?
Mo's gonna be here to talk to us about that. A lot of this we're gonna have to
Defer until after
defer until after
the warrant hearing. All right, so we gotta wait for the warrant hearing on the rest of that stuff. So we have 15 minutes to cover here. Any town administrator report or update?
I don't have anything this week. Do you wanna do selectmen's report?
Let's do selectmen's reports, although I suspect ours are all gonna be the same in that we've been doing a substantial amount of work on the police chief appointment. But Pete, if to the extent you have a selectman report.
I don't think I've done anything since the last meeting that isn't police chief related, so.
The only, it's still police chief related, I can attest, I probably covered at least 3 miles at the state hospital on Saturday, talking this through with one of my advisors here in town. And it was a vigorous walk, but we got through that. The only other point, informally, I've been talking with Mike Pastore about coming to present to the warrant committee on this framework that we've talked about, the 5 components. And I got an email from him just before I headed over here that I think we're going to try to do that on the, he was joking about April 1st being the date for me to do that. We're going to target April 8th, so that would be probably a good time to do it.
Okay. Yeah, and
Mike, I guess the other thing that I should report on maybe is that the Medfield Foundation is going to have the Volunteer Awards event on March 31 at the center, 3 o'clock. Public's invited. We're going to be honoring Steve and Marie Zach Nolan with a Lifetime Achievement Award, Pat Casey with the Volunteer of the Year Award, and Maeve Devlin with the Youth Volunteer of the Year Award. It's always a very nice event where these people tell these little vignettes about what it is they do and how they do it, and some of those are kind of magical and really fun to hear. So everybody's invited.
excellent. So no, I don't have anything beyond the work we've done with respect to the police chief search over the last 5 days. I'd have to look back at my timesheets to see how many hours it was. It was quite a few. All right. Anybody else have any comments on anything we've discussed so far? Mark, any updates for us? Any town council updates?
The Goldman matter has been referred back to the Conservation Commission for a hearing on April 4th.
Okay.
Is that the Noon Hill Road?
Yes.
All right.
Judge, we were at a status conference last week. The judge determined that the appropriate forum was the Conservation Commission, which never held a hearing because the Goldmans didn't appear before the Conservation Commission. So the judge has sent it back for the Concom to hear the matter.
Okay. Town meeting warrant, structure of budget articles, warrant articles. Town administrator goals, we just got the update. I don't think we have
No, we'll put that on the agenda.
put that on the agenda for the 26th. Preliminary town budgets, all of that's after the warrant hearing. So, I mean, at the moment, we don't have anything to do until 7:05.
We got a very nice letter from Jerry Cianciolo.
Oh, let's
that
cover
we
the-
should, maybe we
yes.
should read that.
Let's
It's
cover
not
the letter
often we
from-
get such a good letter.
Yes, this is a great letter, and I am going to read the letter. It
Run
also
out of agenda- When you run out of agenda items, start sharing the informational items.
right. So we did. We got a letter, each of us, I think, and I think this was also published in the Medfield Press and the
I think it
Hometown
was in-
Weekly.
I think it was in both papers.
Yeah. So Jerry Ciola, 7 Stephen Lane. As a selectman, you have a special interest in knowing the goings-on in Medfield. Here's something you should deservedly take great pride in. For the past 4 years, I've offered educational classes at senior centers throughout the area, including the Councils of Aging in Westwood, Franklin, Norfolk, Wrentham, Foxborough, Norwood, Walpole, and Medfield. Mine are highly interactive, college-like seminars that challenge seniors to think in fresh ways. But I'm not writing to tout my programs. I'm writing because, having worked at various senior centers in the region, I have a unique perspective into their hospitality, their programming, and their staffs. You should know, as a town official, that the center at Medfield is superior in each of these categories. First is the welcoming atmosphere. At many centers where I teach, I notice how newcomers are often uneasy upon entering. Perhaps the receptionists aren't cordial or the staff is behind closed doors. Not so at the center. What you feel upon walking in is warmth and accommodation. You sense the staff is genuinely interested and there to help you. Second is the programming. It's not unusual for me to enter a senior center at 1 p.m. and find the facility empty. Again, the opposite is the case in Medfield. Typically, as I know firsthand, it's a battle for space at the center, since on any given day there are exercise classes, music performances, outreach offerings, lectures, card groups, and classes like mine. The bustle itself is contagious and makes everyone feel younger. Third, and most important, is the staff. At many senior centers where I teach, professional burnout seems to have set in. Many staff members have held their jobs for decades. They adhere to routines they find comfortable, and they lack the energy and intellectual curiosity needed to keep their centers robust. To a person, I found the opposite attitude in Medfield. Susan Bernstein, Lisa Donovan, Bill Party, and Kathy Powers seem as eager as if it were their first day on the job, and Roberta Lynch, the director, has the gift of staying professionally fresh, even though she's been with the center for many years. Whether she's writing a winning grant proposal, comforting a distressed widow, directing a staff member, or chopping lettuce for a spaghetti supper, Roberta is the cheerful, lively, and welcoming face of the center, full of energy, full of compassion, and full of curiosity. Like you, I am a resident of Medfield, and like you, I take great pride in the center, a thriving organization that serves our community with unmatched excellence. Thank you for all your tireless and often thankless work. Sincerely, Jerry Cianciolo. So, excellent endorsement of the council.
Jerry is actually a professional writer. He's an editor, and he was actually a speechwriter for the former Governor Como, I think, of New York.
Oh, wow. Well, it's a very well-written letter.
Yeah, it is.
So, Other items. We already went over the election coming up. We went over the Medfield Foundation award ceremony. We got a letter from Xfinity updating us on a copy of their policies and procedures, a sample subscriber bill, work order, and rate and channel lineup information for Medfield.
I'm sure Bill would like to give an update on where we are in the PIP process.
Yeah, Bill?
I was going to volunteer.
I figured I'd volunteer you.
Okay, so there's an information item that says basically we got a response back from DCAM. There's nothing objectionable in the response. Some of the comments were actually directed at something they had not yet put before us. So they had come up with several remedial alternatives for the laundry parcel that they had sent to DEP, but they had not submitted to the PIP group. So one of the things that we did with that letter also that they're responding to here was encourage them to get the PIP process started again and to reestablish the good line of communications and rapport that we had had with DCAM before they had had their personnel changes. And as I had said before, basically what's happened is they didn't do anything for a year. So we are now back in the PIP process. We are in the process of submitting the town's comments. I submitted my comments last week, and I think I sent copies to the selectmen. Again, there's nothing in there, I think, that's not related to ensuring that we establish communications going forward. And most of my comments were directed around how do we memorialize the decisions that we've made that will probably should outlive certainly me and some of the other people who are involved in this. And essentially, DCAM is committed in perpetuity to take responsibility for the reconstructed overlook area. Unfortunately, if we went on historic performance, the loss of 2 people in DCAM interrupted that perpetual care. And we've now got them thinking about how they're going to get back into it, what they're going to do, not legislatively, but at least officially with the appropriate filing of documents with DEP to ensure that they take care of the property, you know, for the future. Okay, that was 3 minutes. That's about the best I can do.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Bill.
So shall I tell the story that Bill stepping in reminds me of? Several years ago, I was at the Mass Municipal Association's annual meeting in Boston, and Doris Kearns Goodwin was delivering the opening talk to the several hundred people that were there to start off the process. And she was she just published the Team of Rivals book, and so she talked about leadership, citing Lincoln as the source of her information. And she finished, and everybody clapped, and she sat down, and then they announced that the governor was supposed to be next, and he wasn't there, and so then they turned to Doris, and they said to her, would you mind filling in until the governor comes? And so then she talked for a long time about Roosevelt and Churchill, equally fascinating. So, anything else, Bill?
I'll tell you about my experience with Churchill. We can always do the shadow pictures, you know.
Yeah, tick, 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 tick.
Do you mind if I do a handout?
Sure. Why don't you hand us the stuff and yeah.
Yes, and I can dance around.
Yeah,
It's
do you know
it's-
any jokes?
It's always the the peril of the precise time of the hearing that you have to wait until. Very rarely does this board get done early with anything, so you very rarely have that issue. But
Thank you.
Thank you.
Something to look at.
Okay, sure, great.
thank you.
All right.
And then anybody in the audience?
So, Mr. Chairman, if you're not going to do anything further before this hearing,
Are you
I'm going to
Sarah?
recuse myself.
Ah,
Are you
okay.
Sarah?
Yes.
Hi.
Hi, Mark. Nice to meet you. In person.
There can only be one newspaper. Okay, got it. Thank you, TJ.
I think we're there. Although I think it is 7:05 on that clock as I see it. So we will welcome. I apologize. How do you pronounce your last name? Trico. Sarah Trico, counsel for the Kingsbury Club. Please.
Adjust the podium. Hello, I'm Sarah Trico. I'm the attorney for Kingsbury Club Medfield, Inc., technically. Specifically with respect to the Kingsbury Club located at 2 Ice House Road in Medfield, Mass. The reason we are here, I am here on behalf of the club. I'm also here with John Porter, CEO of Clean Footprint, who is a proposed tenant under the leases that we have presented, as well as TJ Coveney. He is the CEO of Energy Tree. They're going to answer and speak to basically the actual logistics of the solar panels as well as the potential benefits to the town. I just want to give you an overview of basically the project that's currently happening at the Kingsbury Club and then why we're here. Obviously, you all know that Kingsbury Club's under a ground lease. Under the terms of the ground lease, we're here to ask for approval for the subleases for the, it's going to be about 5 acres of solar panels total. It's going to be on the existing roof, the proposed roof of the new building that's going in, hopefully to be completed no later than December 2019, fingers crossed. The current parking with a canopy, and then the new proposed parking area for the newly constructed building. The project itself, not including the solar panels, is about a $10 million expansion to the current Kingsbury Club. 2 additional indoor tennis courts, 8 pickleball courts that are indoor, specifically designated for pickleball. Apparently in New England that doesn't exist. There aren't any specific to just pickleball, so that's a cool perk.
What is pickleball?
Beats me. My husband plays squash, so I know that racket sport. I know that one. But no, it's similar to tennis, but usually they configure a tennis court to play the pickleball, so this is the actual designated 8 pickleball courts. And there's also 2 regulation basketball courts, and then lobby and office areas. So that is the expansion that's proposed. As I said, it's a $10 million expansion that's been financed. The solar panel leases will help to bring solar to the community, bring solar to Kingsbury Club, and it's also an incentive to reduce the carbon footprint of the larger building that is being constructed on the property. And it's also to help my clients offset the cost of this $10 million expansion that's been in the works for quite some time. The solar panel lease, the solar panel and the lease that we presented, there are 4 separate ones, but they're essentially mirror images of one another, but for the location of the solar panels. The solar leases themselves are ready to be signed. We've gone through and gotten the approval of our financing attorneys, so Eastern Bank's approval, their attorneys. So as soon as and if we get town's approval, we can go ahead and sign and get going on the actual option term, which I'm going to have John kind of talk more about the benefits of the solar panels themselves, what they can offer the town, and speak much more intelligently about solar panels and energy in general, because I'm not a solar attorney. So.
I have a question about pickleball.
I'm
Don't know. I'm also not a pickleball attorney.
I'm particularly interested in the pilot agreement and who it would be with and the likelihood it would be assigned and those sorts of things.
Yeah, I can.
You can answer
It's
that.
a payment in lieu of.
Yeah, if you,
Yeah,
you just need a
that's
microphone.
Yes, sir.
Either
It's
up
there.
on the up on the podium or
Okay.
yeah.
Right. So my name is John Porter. I represent Clean Footprint, and I'm the CEO of that company. We've been in business close to 8 years. We've done over $50 million worth of solar projects within the state of Massachusetts. We've negotiated many pilot agreements with many towns and cities throughout the Commonwealth. What's exciting about this project is I think it right now currently could be the largest one in Eversource East, which I don't think will last long because there's a lot of activity under the new SMART program. But bottom line is the handout that I gave you all outlines some benefits to the town. And one of those is the $300,000 value. In truth, it could be as high as $400,000. We would negotiate, Clean Footprint would negotiate that pilot agreement with the designee of the town. I assume you, sir.
I'm just the attorney.
Okay. And so we would negotiate that based on different valuations. One of the tricky things about the SMART program that's just been rolled out statewide is that it's a block program, and it's been modeled after the state of New York. And what happens is the blocks descend in value, and as they're used up, it waterfalls into the next block at a lower value. So what we're playing is a game of the early bird gets the worm. So the sooner we get this project, its SMART allocation under the state program, the higher the value of that project, therefore the higher the value of the pilot payment. So just to give you some background on how that would look, that could be as high as $400,000 over the 20-year period. In addition to that, we would like to mention that if the town is interested in purchasing the energy from the array at a discount, we could also negotiate that. Today, until we get this lease signed, we can't negotiate anything on that. But that could be an additional $20,000 plus savings to the town each year, or another $400,000. So indeed, this project could benefit Medfield really between $400,000 and $800,000 if we get a move on, if we get the better block value. So time is of the essence. We hope that you'll vote in favor. I could go over some of the environmental attributes, but you all can see them in the handout.
Mm-hmm.
It's really remarkable. For every kilowatt hour that's produced on that array, you're offsetting 1.5 pounds of carbon that goes into the air from coal. And if you compare it to natural gas, which has less emission, carbon emission, you're still just under 1 pound per kilowatt hour. And if you think about your bill each month and how many kilowatt hours you use, it's amazing how many thousands and tons of carbon we're emitting as the town of Medfield. Well, this can offset some of what Medfield is currently putting into the air. So it could be a very positive environmental issue also, along with something that could help your fiscal situation.
Mr. Sorrell.
All right, so this is a green community.
Yes, sir.
We've got that designation. I believe, without putting words in their mouths, that the selectmen are receptive to solar projects. My concerns, having looked through these documents, is how this is going to be structured. What does your company do? Do you stay in this for the long term, or do you do the construction? Do you just broker this? What goes on? At some point, you go out of the picture. And I'm telling you that because I was involved in the town of Franklin with a very large solar facility, which is actually providing the town with electricity, but no sooner did it get constructed than the initial party with whom we contracted flipped the project. The second company went into bankruptcy, and the town just got through negotiating a settlement on a claim clawback because they claimed that the payments made under the pilot agreement were preferences under the bankruptcy law. So we need to know, my advice to the selectmen is to know who we're dealing with now and going forward.
Yeah, Clean Footprint normally stays in the deal through construction and even beyond. We bring in tax equity, and then we bring in normally large insurance companies, that type of money does come into these to fund them. And that's the source of a lot of these projects that you see throughout the state. But they're billion-dollar companies, and the chance of them going bankrupt are slim to none.
Who would sign the pilot agreement with the town?
We would, Clean Footprint would.
And
But it would stay with the project no matter what would happen with Clean
in
Footprint.
terms of Clean Foot's ability to assign that contract unilaterally to a third party? Yes or no?
I've done them both ways. I've done them where we have to get the buy-off and we are open to that.
All right.
Certainly, it doesn't bother us because we know that whoever our partner is.
Because all these documents seem to be structured anticipating that the project's gonna be.
Yeah, I mean, it is the normal course of events in the solar development business, is that you do have a developer, which is our company, and then the developer then basically structures the finance, brings the finance into the project. Some developers stay in, some developers are bought out, to your point. Yeah.
had one, my questions will all be dumber and less sophisticated. The one thing that struck me as I read the agreement, a normal one thing I picked up on is that the obligation of this installation is direct to the town, so this is not like the Kingsbury Club subleasing to a subcontractor that's part of the Kingsbury Club that we're looking at an expansion of the Kingsbury Club. This is actually, it would be easy for me to visualize if there was a piece of land that had been subleased from the original and say, okay, this piece of land, there's a new building and a new business here, and yeah, you tax that business. Given that this is an asset that's being placed on above, I'm thinking, well, on roofs and above
and
things,
above
I'm
improvements.
trying to visualize whether from a legal how the town should think differently about this asset that's not really like a separate operating entity like a business. It's just this installation which does something that produces electricity.
It's personal property
it's
that's subject to taxation.
Yeah, and I, just because it's out of my strike zone, I find myself trying to visualize how we should be thinking about it.
This is new territory for a lot of people, because solar, I mean, what you're really talking about is having your own plant, electric plant, which does not give off any CO2 or any other pollutants like mercury, etc. You have a clean power plant in your city that's providing you not only potentially energy at a discount, but it's also providing revenue for the town through taxes, and it's also strengthening your tenant, because and I can tell you that the banks that I deal with frequently, we always have to get SNDAs that allow us to operate on these properties, but they're tickled pink because what we're doing is we're adding a layer of security on top of an already ongoing business. So you've got your business, the Kingsbury Club, and on top you have a new revenue source for that owner, which then the bank says, that's good news because these are additional revenues. And the town can also look at it saying, it doesn't make any noise, it doesn't hurt anybody, it provides clean energy to the community, it's exactly what we should be doing, you know, my opinion of course, but you know, it's the type of thing we want to be doing. And I would even, you know, where possible in your town over the coming years, I would encourage you all to do as much as you can while the SMART program is still in effect. Why? Because the blocks are diminishing. The sooner you get in, the sooner you get a piece of it. But secondly, it's because of all the benefits that it can bring your town. And so in a way, not to be the Chamber of Commerce here, but you really, I think, want to get behind it and help projects happen that are not unsightly or in places that you don't want them to be, but are in places that you would approve of.
Another question I had.
Yes, sir.
I didn't know until tonight, this is because you're talking about pilot. So do you all have it sounds like you have a special or not, I don't know if you're not for profit or, why are we talking pilot payments rather than some sort of straight tax payment?
You know, I don't know the exact history of this. All I know is that every solar deal that we've been involved in Massachusetts has been a pilot.
So it must be some state
And
program.
I'm sorry, I don't know the history behind why it is. I just know that's always what we do.
You wouldn't know. Is it? I'm thinking universities or pilots.
No, I have some concerns at the present status of the law with respect to these. It's a gray area in terms of solar and the ability to tax it directly.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I did talk to Yvonne, and she felt because it was on town-owned property that would put it in a different category, and that we would have the right otherwise to tax it.
Okay.
So the pilot agreements generally tend to be because they're providing certainty to the utility, if you will, in terms of how the payments are made, and what
that-
they are going
That
forward.
would actually make sense, because
As
you kind
opposed to
of,
variables based on,
I was just trying to understand.
yeah, well,
what your
variable would,
status
can
was
kill
that
us,
qualified
right,
you
so,
for
yeah,
pilot
that makes
versus
sense,
straight.
yeah.
so,
Okay.
but we definitely wanna, you know, look closely at that pilot agreement and condition everything upon the pilot agreement being satisfactory to the town.
Yeah,
We-
there's many templates and many towns that have already executed these, and a lot of them in National Grid territory, just because they're a little more along the, along the curve.
I'm not smart enough to have more questions right now, Mrs.
And I take it that the pilot agreement's not yet in that stack
It's
of
not
papers
here.
that we got.
No, we can't do a pilot until we have the signed site leases, and that normally happens in the course. We also, just keep in mind also, we have to get this in. One, we've got to get smart allocation under the state to make this project work. And then secondly, we've got to get permission to interconnect from the utility. Either one of those things, if they go wrong for us, it would kill the project, and then pilots become moot. So as soon as we get those things handled, we know we've got a project, then we would approach the city to work out a pilot. And, it's normally done even before construction. It can be done during construction, but there's plenty of time, because it takes quite a while to bring one to fruition. So.
It was it's 4 leases, right?
We did 4 leases because we wanted to divide it up by new construction. And we weren't sure, well, if the new construction doesn't happen, we want our other leases to stand alone.
Okay.
But in truth, when this project would go forward, you actually would have 2 meters. You'd have 1 meter for the roof projects, 1 meter for the canopy projects, and then it ties into the utility line.
So,
Probably too much information, but
if they were to vote tonight to approve this, would it be acceptable that that there be a condition imposed, no construction to commence or no building permits to issue until the parties work out a mutual agreement on
on the
pilot?
absolutely, we have no problem with that at all. Yes.
More generally, what's our time frame? This is, for me, this was, I'll take legal advice if this is all just buttoned up tight. I read it quickly because of all the other stuff we've been dealing with. I picked up on enough things that said, okay, this is at least a different animal than what I was looking for. Do we need to decide tonight, or do we have time?
Well, we
And not
urge
actually-
you to decide tonight in favor, because time is the enemy. The sooner we get our application into the utility, the sooner we can get our answer back
Yeah.
on the SMART program. And again, going back to the blocks, they're descending. And the better the block we get, the more money the town gets. It's really quite tied together.
So Mark, have you actually gone through this in detail?
I went through, as I said, they are essentially four parallel documents.
I figured that out at about page 180. 108.
And the issues that I've raised, my concern was, again, based on the language in here, that basically it's a carte blanche for an assignment, just you're agreeing in advance to an assignment.
Mhm.
And that something you might anticipate is going to happen.
So I guess my point is, if we are
If you
agreeing in
have-
principle here today, I get it. If we're agreeing to a document here that we find acceptable, I'm not sure that I get the urgency, but it's like, this is a,
My comfort level would be addressed if you're willing to enter into a pilot agreement that is not assignable without the town's assent.
Yeah, and I've full agreement.
Because otherwise, we don't really, other than what it happens, it's up at his property, it doesn't impact the town directly.
well, let me challenge that just a little bit. And just so you know, philosophically, I'm all on board. I have solar panels on my roof. I'm not fighting this philosophically, but I'm looking at this saying, well, if Kingsbury suddenly decided they wanted to graze cows on their grass and it wasn't interfering, we'd basically have a problem with that, I think. So this is adding something that is being done on this property, and I'm looking at it and saying, okay, I got a couple, just from this picture, I have a couple of immediate questions. First off, is the fire department okay with these canopies in the parking lot? Are they satisfied that their equipment can make it through
given, I don't know what the height of the canopies are, but there's some practical
We-
things that I
yeah.
have questions around.
Roof issues for the fire department as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
Things-
All those things go through the normal permitting process. We don't skip anything.
Okay.
And in fact, the clearance on these canopies are 15 feet.
Yeah.
So it's more than what the DOT allows for semis, school buses, fire trucks. So, and the engineers, I mean, we work with the town to make sure that the public safety, yeah, I mean, all these things are parts and pieces of what we do.
Then the other question I had with regard to Ice House Road is, and I have to go out there again, but I think Ice House Road right now pretty much runs right along the edge of the parking lot, except it's an unimproved road. And so, and then we have the lot number 3 beyond it. So I'm just sitting there saying, has the town thought through the idea that suddenly this parking lot is gonna have these canopies right next to an unimproved road that might ultimately need to be improved, and does it matter? And it may be, and I'm not asking you the question, the point I'm making is that this is a relatively complicated lease for people who don't have complicated minds for legal stuff, at least. And I'm looking at it saying, yeah, I like the intent. If I'm approving something or being asked to approve something, it's like, what am I approving? If I'm approving something in principle, that's pretty easy. If I'm approving, yep, I like this lease, go run with Kingsbury and figure it out, and we're all done. I would just.
Well, we're not,
take
I
some
mean,
time
we
to
won't
think
be
about
done
that.
with the town because we'll have to come back again to negotiate a pilot, but also to ask for permissions. And my guess is that we're gonna have to ask potentially for a special exception maybe, because you probably don't have on your books anything that deals with canopies yet, would be my
I think we have
guess.
a prohibition on canopies as such, but
Yeah.
this is solar panels.
But it's new and it's different, and I believe,
Yeah.
see, and we're probably gonna end up helping write the new code or whatever, you know.
Yay.
And this is normal, because the state of Massachusetts has just started incentivizing parking canopies. So you didn't have this issue a year ago. You do now. So every town around Massachusetts is currently working on, okay, well, how do we regulate? How do we deal with these things? What are the setbacks? What's the height restrictions? And so these are all things we're willing and able to work with you
And the
on.
lease itself, we have to follow all the proper protocol for getting licenses and permits and all of that. So the lease is in place for that reason, but there's also, it's the obligation of the proposed tenant to abide by all town regulations, and that includes areas of, if there's an easement that's required to access, lot 3 over town land, that has to come back through here, and we've specifically referenced the fact that, Kingsbury Club does not own the land, so if there are any easements, whether it's over town land or utility-wise, we have to come back through here and propose the easement.
This is 3 lots on Ice House Road. One of them is not developed at present. It's something the town's been wrestling with. And so I think we do need to look at whether or not this development has a potential to impact or restrict the town's ability to do whatever it is the town may want to do on Lot 3.
I mean, from personal
Somebody has
experience,
to look at that.
yeah, the canopies won't block anything. You're gonna be able to move underneath, and in fact, the aisleways are gonna still be open.
Actually, I was reacting more to some of the provisions about the canopies not being shaded by anything new being put up. It didn't sound like anything we might do on another lot would fall within the restrictions on the Kingsbury's the only one that could do anything.
Right.
But nonetheless, I was sensitive to, so if we suddenly decided to put a string of buffer trees between the Kingsbury lot and lot number 3, and they were really tall ponderosa pines, and,
I think
from
that
3
lot
o'clock
is
in the
south of
afternoon
Lot
to.
3.
Yeah, so what I'm getting at is, it's not that I'm criticizing what you've got, it's that I'm sitting here saying, okay, this is new and different, and I've learned slowly in some cases that there's usually some questions or some issues that I have no clue about that are important to something like this, that
Yeah,
coming so quickly here.
I think
it's like,
the point tonight is to move this partway down the field, get the approval for your tenant to do a sublease with us, with the understanding that there's gonna be a series of steps that we have to go through with the town. So you have multiple bites at the apple. And
Right, the significant one, the fire chief's up the back.
Yeah.
Look, Chief, we have a proposal here for fairly significant solar installation at the Kingsbury Club. I don't know if there's anything, whether you've been approached up till now, or whether you've any thoughts you'd like to offer.
Yeah, and again, just to repeat myself, is that this is all part of the process that we would go through on this project.
It's the annual warrant hearing, so you actually have the fire chief, you have the town planner, and the building commissioner all hearing this for the first
You
time.
can really accelerate this.
Excellent. That's good, actually. It makes it better and
You may wanna
easier,
introduce
hopefully.
yourself on the way out.
Yeah, good.
I've been involved in multiple solar panel installations, and usually as long as we review the plans, after the installation we have fire department inspections. We show everybody how everything works, where it's located. There's usually no issue whatsoever.
What about canopies, parking lot canopies, have you dealt with those?
We've had a couple of proposals. Actually, the Sandwich Police Department was supposed to get a canopy. It was part of the design. And then it ended up getting cut so they could get an administrative wing on the new station up down there. So I've had some experience with those. It's all engineered, and it's usually no issues.
And we're looking at a clearance of 15 feet at its lowest point. So
Yeah, which will be, that'll be sufficient so we'll be able to drive apparatus under. I think my tallest truck is like 10'10". And that was an issue down there, is that they weren't going to build it high enough, and I was complaining about that.
yeah.
You had a tower truck down there?
Yes, we did, yeah.
How many other applications do you have for this region for the smart program? Is this your only application, or do you have
Oh,
other?
no, we've got quite a few. We've got a bunch in New Bedford right now, very active area. We've got probably 5 different meters we're working there. So multiple canopies, multiple roof. We just got done with a 4 megawatt ground mount in Winchendon on a construction and demolition debris depository or landfill. And yeah, so, and we've gone through, national heritage and, all the environmental screens, and we do a lot of that. Now, we do a lot of that work up front, but then we have to go get letters saying, indeed, we're not in areas. And so we've had a lot of development experience in that respect.
So let me see if I can be clear on what we're being asked to approve tonight. And again, Mark, you need to tell us whether what we're being asked to do is something you'd advise us to do tonight. It sounds like you're asking us to approve the Kingsbury Club's desire to sign a subcontract with you for this purpose.
Yes, sir.
Subject to our being able to negotiate a satisfactory pilot agreement, and subject to all of the normal rules, regulations, and bylaws and restrictions imposed by the town. So
Permits and approvals.
in order to do all this, you're going to have to get the permits, approvals.
And the assignment of that, those.
So the way I should be thinking about this is, if I think this is a good idea for the town, if I think it's an appropriate additional use for the property that the Kingsbury Club is located on, and it appears the Kingsbury Club is okay with it, then it's probably okay to go ahead and approve this. We're not actually negotiating the sublease, because that's between the Kingsbury Club, and it's just more a matter of agreeing with this, subject to those 2 stipulations. Yes? Okay, then I guess I am okay with it.
Yeah.
Don't forget to speak into the mic.
Right.
And you've got a gentleman out.
Okay. Mr. Massaro, briefly if possible.
I am nothing if not brief.
True.
I just had a couple of comments. Number one, I skimmed the package. I admit to not reading it with the level of detail I would read a DCAM document. I apologize for that. But one of the things that jumped out at me right at the beginning was that the, who's Sunspire, by the way?
Sunspire is a project level company, so that's owned by Clean Footprint.
Okay, so that's like another third level or fourth level.
Every project has its own entity that owns it.
Okay.
And that's the way the industry works.
All right. The other thing I thought was interesting was that it calls for, presumably the Sunspire lease would be with the Kingsbury Club, and the Kingsbury Club would be agreeing to grant irrevocable exclusive license to enter the property to Sunspire, which,
Subject to.
I mean, it's town property. I mean,
Yeah.
Somewhere the rights for the town are going to be reserved, and I will leave that to Mr. Sorella to
Yeah.
presumably.
They can only grant what they have as a tenant.
Well, I mean, so I mean, just kind of strange to see it in the, you know, it doesn't say subject to whatever the rights that are.
It wouldn't matter what they said, they have
I
no
understand.
authority to bind the
I
town.
understand, but I always like to get my contracts cleaned up first before I sign them, but that's neither here nor there.
It does say throughout is subject to town of Medfield.
Okay. All right, the other comment I had was, and well, first the question, this is one of the largest, you said one of the largest.
In Eversource East, yes. Yes.
Do you have photos of what a similar project looks like somewhere that you could make available to the town?
Did you get one of the handouts?
I did, but
Okay.
you know, it doesn't.
Yeah, what I could do, and I'd be happy to follow up, but if you go online to RBI, it's called RBI.com, and RBI is one of the premier manufacturers, and most likely would be the manufacturer of this array, of this canopy project. They've been in business close to 100 years. They got their start in doing greenhouses for all the big box retailers throughout the country, and then they got into solar about 10 years ago. But they're an amazing company. You'll be able to see many photos of many projects that have been built.
And the reason I asked that question again is because we are still undetermined, or have not determined as yet, what the potential for Ice House Road is. Gus mentioned it, and one of the thoughts that occurred to me, and why I asked about what does one of these projects look like, is what is the potential impact on the future value for Ice House Road. And it's, again, I'm thrilled that the Kingsbury Club is successful enough to undertake a $10 million project or whatever. I wish them the best. I hope they go forward. I hope they're extremely successful in the future, but I just wanted to get that question out and get those couple of concerns out. That's all. Thank you.
Mr. Caragliano.
Tom Caragliano, Phillip Street. In the U.S., 39% of the energy is by coal. In Massachusetts, and I stand to be corrected, there isn't one generator, power plant is by coal. So if you're dealing with someone who has a Tesla, ask them if they're fully charged and ask them if they're going echo in ways, and just say, well, 39% and 20%. Okay, now the next thing is this.
Possibly? Okay.
Yeah. I went to the Mass Tech Collaborative years ago and came back to the town, as Christine will tell you, and explained what our electric bills were and everything else. And then the electric committee came, and we saved an appreciable amount of money by working with the Mass Tech Collaborative. My next question is, what is the efficiency of these panels 5 years out, 10 years out, 20 years out? Generally, a solar panel is only 28% efficient initially, and it starts to decay with time. How is this, and what would you predict or project these panels to be for the Kingsbury Club going forward, putting that kind of money in 5 years out, 10 years out with this current state-of-the-art of solar panels?
Is that directed to Gus and I?
Anybody who wants to answer it or take it up. No, I'm technical Tom, as you know. And
I know.
I ask
Thank
lots
you.
of questions along that way.
Technical Tom. It's excellent, and it's a good question. I can't really talk to the necessarily the efficiency of the panel itself. What I can talk to is that each year we plan on 0.5% of degradation. To your point, the polysilicon degrades, and and what we do is within our numbers is 0.5% per year. Now this is a 20-year project, but this is where it could get real fun for the town and for us and for anybody involved. Is that we still have solar panels, not me myself, but we have solar panels working from the 1970s and 80s. They are still producing energy today, but to your point, they degrade each year by 0.5%. So what's nice about that is you can plan that into your models. But it's quite possible that these panels will be operating 30, 40 plus years. Nobody really knows how long they're going to last.
And to be mercenary about it from a town standpoint, if I heard you right, you negotiate a 20-year pilot agreement. So I don't care.
No, I just, sell as we were, that's all.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think at this point, the only question is whether in the town's capacity as the landlord of the land on which the Kingsbury Club sits, under the terms of our lease with the Kingsbury Club, are we going to let the Kingsbury Club get a sublease for solar panels? So, and I think that's our only question. So I would be willing to entertain a motion to say yes to that now. And we should have started this a little earlier.
Yeah,
but-
so I'll move that we approve the Kingsbury Club's request to negotiate a sublease with
Clean Footprint.
Clean
Sunstar.
Footprint for the purpose of constructing solar panels on rooftops and canopies over the parking lot, subject to a satisfactory pilot payment agreement with the town, and subject to all the normal town oversight of a construction project of this nature in terms of permits.
No building permit to issue until the town has a satisfactory pilot agreement.
It's fine.
Okay. I second. All in favor?
Aye.
Great. Thank you. We'll now move on to the town warrant hearing. Before, one last announcement. We did want to extend our condolences to the family of June Kelly, who passed away this week. All right. Now we'll switch up. Warrant committee, I think I see most of them here.
How are you? Sure, why don't, here, I'll slide it down. I'll slide it down. Yeah.
No. That's like you were before. That is, you come on.
You guys want me to move
You
down?
come on the TV, it looks like you're in the little. Hey, Bob, when you go through life at 5'5.5", always look at days you get a big chair with a cushion. I'll take on Joanne's.
A weird spot, I don't know.
No, but we can share it if you want. I don't know, we can share it. I have
I got what you sent out. I put it on my.
Yeah, this is yours.
The public hearing matrix.
What I can do, yeah, so what I can do is I'll pass it to you. You know what I mean? So I'll read mine, and then I'll pass it to you.
What numbers are you on?
So I'm 5, 16. What's your first one?
I'm 20 and 21. I'm
Okay,
very
yeah,
easy.
yeah.
So what numbers are you?
I'll do my 2, then you do your 2, and then I have
And then
2
I'll pass
after
it
that.
back. Okay.
You're on. All right. The only thing is the microphone. Yep. You're gonna have to get them like where your mouth is. It's not like boom.
Just speak right to the microphone. How we doing? Good? We on? All right. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. We're here to go through the warrant. Very excited to be here, and we will get right to it. We'll read enough of the article text so you know what we're talking about. Let you know what our recommendation is, and feel free to jump in with questions. They have name tags, right? All right, fine. I'm Mike Pastore. This is Christine Barden. You can introduce yourself. That's fine.
Amanda Hall.
Jeremy Marset. Hello.
Newton Thompson.
Sharon Tatro.
Bob Slaney.
Okay. The first three articles, I believe, is Scott in the audience? Scott, are those going to be in the consent calendar? Okay, I'll read them anyway. Article 2, to see if the town will vote to accept the reports of the several town officers for the past year. Warrant Committee recommends passage. Article 3, to see if the town will vote to accept the following name sums as perpetual trust funds for the care of lots in the Vine Lake Cemetery, the interest thereof as may be necessary for said care. The remainder as included in the warrant. Warrant Committee recommends passage. And Article 4, to see if the town will vote to set expenditure limits for 53E.5 revolving funds established under the Code, Town of Medfield, Chapter 117, Departmental Revolving Funds for fiscal year 2020. Remainder as included in the warrant. Warrant Committee recommends passage. The amounts will be inserted.
Article 5 is to see if the town will vote to accept Mass General Laws, Chapters 44, Section 53F and 3/4, to establish a public educational and governmental, also known as a PEG, access and cable-related fund to reserve cable, franchise fees, and other cable-related revenues for appropriation to support PEG access services and oversight and renewal of the cable franchise agreement, and to vote to transfer all cable-related funds except the annual license fee, which will be credited to the general fund, and to appropriate a sum of money for said purposes. The fund to begin operation for fiscal year 2020, which begins on July 1, 2019, and to do any act relating thereto. The Warrant Committee recommends passage.
Article 6, to see if the town will vote to appropriate a sum of money and determine in what manner said sum shall be raised for the purpose of paying an FY18 unpaid bill from, it could be any department or any amount of money. We do not have those specific numbers yet, but the Warrant Committee recommends passage.
Article 7, to see if the town will vote to fix the salary and compensation of the following elected officers: moderator, town clerk, selectmen, assessors, school committee, trustees of the public library, park and recreation commissioners, planning board, housing authority, and trust fund commissioners, or to do or act anything in relation thereto. The Warrant Committee recommends passage. Article 8, to see if the town will vote to amend the personnel administration plan and classification of positions and pay schedule effective July 1st, 2019, as set out in the warrant, or do or act anything in relation thereto. The Warrant Committee recommends passage.
Article 9, to see if the town will vote to raise and appropriate and or transfer from available funds sums of money requested by the selectmen or any town officer, board, commission, or committee to defray operating expenses of the town for the fiscal year commencing July 1st, 2019, or such other sums as the town may determine as required by Mass General Law, Chapter 41, Section 108, or do or act anything in relation thereto. The Warrant Committee will be heard on this article, but last night at our meeting, we unanimously voted for the following position statement, which is, it is the Warrant Committee's position that we will support an operating budget in Article 9 that will not require an override and therefore will be a balanced budget. We will review budget cut options and vote at our meeting on March 25th, so it is printed in the warrant. That meeting on March 25th will be 7 o'clock at the high school library, and fully encourage and hope many of you will be there at that meeting.
Article 10, to see if the town will vote to raise and appropriate from the FY 2020 tax levy and or transfer from available funds and or borrow for capital expenditures, including the following: the FY 2020 capital budget, and to authorize the Board of Selectmen to sell or trade town-owned equipment and or property as set out in the warrant report, and the proceeds of which shall be applied to the FY 20 capital budget procurements, or to do or act anything in relation thereto. The warrant committee recommends passage.
Article 11, to see if the town will vote to appropriate $782,125 and transfer said sum from the Municipal Building Stabilization Fund created under Article 43 of the 2018 Annual Town Meeting for the purposes and amounts included in the warrant that you have in front of you. The warrant committee recommends passage.
Article 12, to see if the town will vote to appropriate a sum of money and determine in what manner said sum shall be raised to be used with funds from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and the town of Millis for the purposes of making repairs to the West Street Bridge, and to authorize the Board of Selectmen to enter into contracts with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, the town of Millis, and private contractors, and to accept and or receive funds and or grants from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, the federal government and or private parties for such purpose, or do or act anything in relation thereto. The warrant committee recommends passage.
Article 13, to see if the town will vote to amend the Code of Town of Medfield, Chapter 30, Finances, Section 30-6, Disposal of Personal Property, by deleting, quote, having a value of $1,000 or less, end quote, and substituting therefore, quote, having a value of less than $10,000, end quote, or do or act anything in relation thereto. The warrant committee recommends passage. That's me again. Article 14, to see if the town will vote to transfer funds received from the Massachusetts Department of Transportation for the town's share of the fee charged for Uber, Lyft, or ride-sharing services originating in the town, said funds to be used for road and or sidewalk improvements, or do or act anything in relation thereto. That amount will be added. The warrant committee recommends passage. Article 15, to see if the town will vote to authorize the Board of Selectmen, with the approval of the Water and Sewerage Board, to lease space on Mount Nebo Water Tower for up to 10 years for the installation and or maintenance of cell tower antennae on such terms, conditions that they may deem to be in the best interest of the town, or do or act anything in relation thereto. The warrant committee recommends passage.
Article 16, to see if the town will vote to authorize the Board of Selectmen to accept a gift of land from Joseph and Deborah Destito, consisting of an unimproved parcel of land containing approximately 1.04 acres located at the end of Mohawk Street and shown on Medfield Assessor's Map 3 as parcel 62 and recorded with the Norfolk County Registry of Deeds in Book 11917, page 636, for conservation purposes, and to do or act anything in relation thereto. The warrant committee recommends passage.
Article 17, to see if the town will vote to appropriate a sum of money and determine in what manner said sum shall be raised for the purpose of making repairs to the Danielson-Ritchie Pond Dam, and the Board of Selectmen and that the Board of Selectmen in consultation with the Conservation Commission be authorized to apply for and receive federal, state, and or private grants or loans, and to enter into contracts with private contractors to undertake such repairs, or do or act anything in relation thereto. The warrant committee recommends passage.
Article 18, to see if the town will vote to appropriate a sum of money and determine in what manner said sum shall be raised for the purpose of making improvements to the economic vitality of the town, or do or act anything in relation thereto. The warrant committee recommends passage with minority report.
Article 19, to see if the town will vote to transfer a sum of money from sewer betterments paid in advance to the Sewer Stabilization Fund, or do or act anything in relation thereto. The warrant committee recommends passage.
Article 20, to see if the town will vote to appropriate a sum of money and determine what manner said sum shall be raised for the purpose of making an annual contribution to the Other Post-Employment Benefits Trust Fund, otherwise known as OPEB, or do or act anything in relation thereto. The Warrant Committee recommends passage. Article 21, to see if the town will vote to amend the Code of the Town of Medfield bylaws to add a new Chapter 195 Plastic Checkout Bag Prohibition as follows. Chapter 195 Plastic Checkout Bag Prohibition, Section 195-1, Purpose and Intent. The purpose of the bylaw is to eliminate the usage of thin film, single-use plastic bags at checkout by all merchants in the town of Medfield, on and after the effective date specified therein. The remainder as included in the warrant. The Warrant Committee recommends passage.
Article 22, to see if the town will vote to amend the Code of the Town of Medfield, Chapter 130, Fire Protection, to add a new Section 130-5, Fire Hydrant Access, with text as included in the warrant, and to renumber the succeeding sections of the chapter as required, and to authorize the town to do so, and to renumber, reletter, and or take other action necessary to reformat this new bylaw section to fit within the established format of the Code of the Town of Medfield, or do or act anything in relation thereto. The Warrant Committee recommends passage.
Article 23, to see if the Town of Medfield will vote to create an overlay district consisting of the following parcels as shown on the map titled, quote, Proposed Upper Spring Street Overlay District, USSOD, quote, dated 10/9/18, which is on file with the town clerk and planning department. The remainder of the article is included in the warrant. The Warrant Committee recommends passage.
Article 24, to see if the town will vote to amend the Code of the Town of Medfield, Chapter 300, Zoning, Article 14, Administration and Enforcement, Section 300-14-10, Special Permits by Board of Appeals by deleting subsection E and its subsections 1 through 10 in their entirety and replacing them with the language that's set forth in the remainder in the warrant. The Warrant Committee recommends passage. Article 25, to see if the town will vote to amend the Medfield Town Code, Chapter 300, Zoning Attachment 1, Table of Use Regulations by updating the language used to cite regulatory references within the zoning bylaw. The remainder as included in the warrant. The Warrant Committee recommends passage.
Article 26, to see if the town will vote to authorize the Board of Selectmen to dispose of, by sale or ground lease, a parcel of town-owned land shown as Parcel A, Hinckley South, on a plan of land captioned Approval Not Required, Survey Medfield Senior Center, Medfield, Massachusetts, prepared by Del Pret Engineering, 990 Washington Street. And recorded at Norfolk County Registry of Deeds in Plan Book 672, page 75, containing 5.48 acres to a private developer pursuant to the provisions of GL, General Law, Chapter 30B, Section 16, on such terms and conditions as the Board of Selectmen determined to be in the town's interest, to develop and construct up to 24 single or two-family homes to be made available to senior households qualifying for market rate or affordable housing, and if deemed necessary or desirable, to authorize the Board of Selectmen to petition the General Court of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts to enact special legislation to enable said development and or construction, or do or act anything in relation thereto. The Warrant Committee recommends passage.
Article 27, to see if the town will vote to amend the Code of the Town of Medfield bylaws, Chapter 15, Affordable Housing Trust Fund, by adding the new language shown in bold in the warrant and deleting the language shown as strike through in the warrant. The Warrant Committee recommends passage. Article 28, to see if the town will vote to amend the Code of the Town of Medfield, Chapter 10, Section 10-8, Notification of Appointment, by striking said section in its entirety and substituting therefore the following: Town Clerk Duties, Section 10-8-1, Notification of Appointment. In addition to the duties required by law, the town clerk shall immediately notify in writing all members of committees that may be elected or appointed at any town meeting, stating the name of the committee and the business upon which they are to perform. Section 10.8.2, authority to edit town code. Whenever the town meeting votes to amend the town code, the town clerk is authorized to renumber, reletter, and/or to take any other action necessary to reformat the amendment in any existing sections or provisions within an existing chapter to fit within the established format of the code of the town of Medfield. The Warrant Committee recommends passage. Article 29, to see if the town will vote to authorize the Board of Selectmen to accept a gift of land from Michael R. Taylor and Teresa G. Taylor, consisting of an unimproved parcel of land containing approximately 41,818 square feet, located off Main Street and showed on Medfield Assessor's Map 42 as Parcel 200, title reference Norfolk County Registry of Deeds, Book 15371, page 520, for conservation purposes, or do or act anything on relation thereto. The Warrant Committee recommends passage. Article 30, to see if the town will vote to appropriate a sum of money and determine in what manner said sum shall be raised for the purpose of hiring consultants, engineers, and/or attorneys to assist the town with the development of the former Medfield State Hospital and surrounding areas, to advise the town on matters concerning the site's disposition, reuse, or environmental remediation, said funds to be expended under the direction of the Board of Selectmen, with the understanding that the Board of Selectmen may authorize any other town, board, commission, committee, or department to expend a portion of said funds for such purposes, or do or act anything in relation thereto. The Warrant Committee recommends passage.
Article 31, to see if the town will vote to authorize the Board of Assessors to use a sum of money from free cash in the Treasury for the reduction of the tax rate for the fiscal year 2020, or do or act anything in relation thereto. The Warrant Committee will be heard.
And there you have it. Any questions? We're happy to stick around and chat. Bill.
Is there a list of dollar values somewhere that are assigned to this?
Yes. Most of them are in this packet that's behind you. Some are not. And Mark, I believe those will be added by print, right?
Yes, we're still working on them.
We'll probably be discussing more numbers on Monday because some of the numbers that are associated with them may come up for budget cut discussion on Monday.
Yeah, I was just curious if there's a baseline number somewhere that's publicly available for the items. Usually when we get a copy of the operating budget or whatever, any of them that have talk about a sum. Yeah.
We're working on any budget cuts.
Yeah, I'm not looking to make your job more. I'm serious. Okay. Thank you.
The state hospital wants $150,000.
Okay. That wasn't bad.
Sure.
Besides, you're only going to give me a.
You need a microphone.
There were two articles where the town was getting parcels of land, and they were both for conservation purposes. I guess I was wondering if it's possible to get those for other than conservation purposes, or whether the donors then wouldn't want to do it. It would give the town a lot more flexibility if the town received the land for municipal purposes, because then the town could do anything it wanted with it.
First of all, as a practical matter, the parcel down on the Norfolk line is
Mohawk Lane.
is landlocked and wet, so it's got no useful value otherwise, and it's really something that the owners want to just stop having to pay taxes for. The other parcel, the Taylor parcel here on Main Street, is already subject to a conservation restriction. So they're being, which they gave to the town some years ago when they were living next door. So they're paying again, it's got limited use except for passive recreation by reason of the conservation restriction that's already in place. And again, they just want to get out from under having to continue to pay some residual amount in taxes.
So the parcel on Mohawk, I happen to just know a little bit about it, and it's landlocked because the town, when they took Mohawk, stopped about a foot or two short of it. Obviously, that's the town's land. The town could then opt to connect to that lot. I don't know about the wetness of it, but the town could connect to it. I mean, the town's looking for places to put a group home or something. I don't know if that's a suitable site or not.
Yeah, I have no problem with that, the conservation, that I was simply informed conservation purposes. If you want to change it to municipal purposes, that's not going to happen right away anyway, because the parcel straddles Medfield and Norfolk and is one large parcel, so it needs to be subdivided, which is not an expense that the owners are going to incur, so we're reaching out to see whether we can get Norfolk County engineers to do it, but unless and until that happens, there won't be any conveyance anyway. But I don't have a problem with, do you think that it's upland and potentially developable and you want to make it municipal purposes rather than conservation purposes? It doesn't matter to me, it wasn't my call.
Just gives the town greater flexibility.
We're happy to consider it if the Board of Selectmen wants to change their article to make it municipal purposes rather than conservation.
Tom?
This is a just general request. When the Warrant Committee shares the reports, if historical financial perspective, as it relates to, say, consulting fees or revenue, perhaps with the Mount Nebo water tower as compared to the projected revenue with the lease up at the state hospital, tax values associated with the gifts of land coming to the town, just more. It's a request, just more perspective so that the taxpayers in attendance at the town meeting recognize the historical, potential future, whether it's an expense or revenue, would be appreciated.
Thank you, Mr. Chair Emeritus.
Thank you.
Okay, just a couple of my usual announcements at this time. So one is that to the extent that anybody who is offering one of the articles would like to produce handouts that would be distributed inside the meeting, so inside of where the town clerk sets up her poll, and that needs to be by request and approval. So if anybody has that desire, please do that. And then also, if anybody has a desire to do a presentation at town meeting, we also look at those in advance PowerPoint slides and make a decision whether that's an appropriate use of the town's time. And I do, just encourage people to reach out to me well in advance of that. 3 upcoming dates. So we have it's already been said, but the town election on the 25th. I urge people in this town to come out. I know that Pete had referenced earlier in the evening this year's MFI Volunteer of the Year, but I feel particularly this year because they're contemporaries, and I watched Steve and Marie Nolan over years and years and years put in thousands and thousands of hours, and most of them really kind of underappreciated and in the background. So this is a great acknowledgement, and also to Pat Casey, who similarly, labored and in these meetings that I don't have the patience for personally, over time. And so they're great choices this year. And either by coming on that day, or if you have the inclination to drop a note to those people to help to further acknowledge what was just really tremendous efforts over a long period of time, all to kind of serve their neighbors and all with the best interests of Medfield in mind. So, and then for the town meeting, on the 29th, our last Monday in April meeting. So we move, as you know. Hopefully, yes. Yeah, right. We have to have it approved, right? So, but next year we'll be seeing you in May. So we'll be looking for a quorum as usual, on that evening. And I want to thank the Warrant Committee as well, to Mike and to Sharon and Joanna, our veterans, and also, though, however, for 5 new members of the committee for stepping up this year. I feel very, very confident in the future of the Warrant Committee because of the people that are making up the Warrant Committee going forward. So it's been very much a transition year, and I'm excited to have you and thank you for your service. This year the Warrant allows us to put a particular focus on the budget. In the past, over the last couple of years, I've stood up here, very uncertain about whether we would be one night or two night, or how we were going to, group and block together these articles so that we could treat them and move through them, with the right level of fairness and expedience. And this year, we have a little relief from that. So it's really a good year, I think, for the town to put its attention towards, those components that make up our, our town budget, which speaks a lot to policy. So, I hope that everybody in town will pay attention to the economic considerations. I mentioned to the selectmen just before the meeting that I was proud to be a Medfielder. I went home and to watch on TV, having been involved in past searches in public safety. I know how difficult choices are. So without getting into anything substantively, I talk all the time about the tone in Medfield and civility and all of that, and I think it was demonstrated through the process, and by the way, to our citizens and our neighbors and our police force who came out in the way that that people expressed themselves, full of emotion on a very hard question, with a lot of learning right up until the end. So I feel very, again, proud that that notion of tone and civility, that we've said in this town, that if you go around and you look at a lot of other places, the way that they do business, it's really exemplary and distinguishes us. So as a final segue, this is the first time I've been in this hall since Mike's passing, and very emotional actually as I came up tonight. So I just wanted to acknowledge that, feel compelled to just to say something there, and that tone and that civility, about the way that that we treat one another as friends and neighbors, and it goes back over a long period of time. We have a heritage of that, and certainly over the last 40 years, I attribute a lot of that tone to Michael and the way that he conducted business. So, I just wanted to acknowledge that I was thinking about him here tonight. So, any questions about the town meeting? Okay, look forward to seeing everybody. Bring your friends and neighbors.
Anyone else? Okay. Again, we'll be meeting to talk budget issues on the 25th, and that meeting will not be in the public safety building as normal. It will be in the library at 7 o'clock. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, serious.
Everybody bring their own.
He'll stay here.
What is this one? What is it? The latest one? Yeah, they keep on changing.
Maybe I'll see you next week.
Thank you.
short meeting. So anticlimactic when everybody leaves.
I think all we have left to do is to close the warrant and adjourn.
He says we're on.
Oh, yeah, I got you. I don't know if Evelyn and Christine are coming back, but all we need to do is close the warrant and adjourn. So I think we can do that, and then I just want Christine to confirm that's all we have to do, but I think that's all we have to do.
So as Doris Kearns Goodwin said about Churchill and
So Christine, do we have anything else to do other than close the warrant and adjourn?
I thought you were going to talk about budget policy, and you were going to talk about use of free cash and that kind of thing.
Oh, we are going to talk about
I
that?
thought you were going to talk about that. It was on the agenda, but
Oh, okay.
we don't have to.
All right, I thought we were waiting for the warrant committee to work on their
Oh,
budget
that's fine too.
and come
Yep.
back. I don't know if it,
Okay, that's fine.
yeah.
Yeah, can I have you review one thing though?
Yeah.
Is the budget cuts that the town department heads were proposing.
Okay.
I'm printing those off right now. for you.
Okay, yeah, we'll do whatever you need to do. I just wasn't sure what.
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, and we were going to talk with Mo about cemetery fees.
Oh, jeepers.
and the transfer station stickers.
So, good news, everyone. The meeting goes on. Yeah, no, I forgot about that one. So yeah, we can cover all of that stuff. I had thought, based on our discussion, that we were going to talk about it when the warrant committee was here, just after the warrant committee.
I don't think they wanted to stay to hear that part.
Okay. Thank you. So we can talk about the budget policy and use of free cash as well.
Yep, hold on, don't take that one yet. Pass that down. This is the most recent budget cuts as of this afternoon.
And Christine, these budget cuts are designed to hit what target?
They were designed for us to go back, and this was the first round of asking the department heads to begin to look at if we were going to have to come up with a balanced budget, what could they start to live without in the first round of cuts. After going through them, and after our last meeting, I did take out that we would not use a cut to cut the Sunday hours at the library. We would keep the town hall open for one evening a week, especially after we voted to change it to Tuesdays, and that we would keep the senior center open on Saturdays for the year. Utilizing that comes up with $152,000 worth of budget cuts. So as I begin to work on the budget with the Warrant Committee, I think not that I need it tonight, but just an indication that you're okay with moving forward with these cuts.
So just to review, and I keep feeling like I'm marketing this framework, but it's like it's useful for me. I haven't updated it with the latest information that you have, but based on what we had looked at a week ago, that showed there was about 250,000. If we were going to get to a no override budget, which is what we're talking about here, there'd be a $250,000 in total cuts. I forget whether that included some of the cuts you already put in. I don't think it does. I think that's actually a good number. So this is 152,000 of potentially a 250,000. What I need to do is update the numbers, and then I guess this is budget policy almost. We had talked about last week at least accepting the Warrant Committee's 3% guidance for the schools. So if we use that as the line for the schools, then whatever's left over will go to the town, and I'll have a better number that we can look at. So. But for now, what we're working off of is a $250,000 overage against a no override situation, and there's 152 in here, is what you're saying.
Correct.
Okay.
So if you can, review them, and then you can get back to me individually that you're okay with moving forward, we'll start to.
Yeah, I mean, do you recommend these?
I would recommend
Yeah,
them.
and the department heads are maybe not recommending them, but not.
Yeah.
Are we in any physical danger from the department heads if we make these cuts?
Be nice.
So Chris,
No.
this looks like it has the Council on Aging still in it, reduced Saturday program.
It should be zeroed out. You should have the version.
Okay.
I'll send you an electronic version, to have,
Okay.
but they should be on there. They were listed on there, but then zeroed out after I took them off.
Okay. So this does not cut the Council on Aging Saturday, and it does not cut the library on Sundays. Okay.
Nope. And keeps the town hall open on Tuesday nights going forward.
And George, I appreciate your efforts on postage. Very helpful.
It means the three of you will have to come in to pick up all of your bills. So one of the things that we were talking about with the department heads when we were talking about cutting is the other issue we have is revenue. So one of the things that Mo and I have been working on is, given what our transfer station budget looks like, is increasing the transfer station sticker fees for the 2-year.
Mo Goulet, welcome.
So as far as the transfer station sticker fees, we're looking at recycling costs, as you know, have increased more than triple for us right now. We started last year, beginning of calendar year 2018, at $24 a ton. It moved to 50 to 60. It was 60 through December of this past year. In January, the price went up to $70 a ton. We've been in negotiation with our contractor, Yale Harvey. They're holding at $70 a ton right now. The trend is moving higher and higher. I think I mentioned to the Warrant Committee we're at $80 to $120 a ton. Some of the cities and towns are paying. We are currently at 70. They'll hold the $70 price for the current year all the way through 2019. However, we're still in negotiation trying to cut that down, but so it is more than tripled in the last year. And some of the consultants we're dealing with are really concerned with contacting DEP and trying to do something about our local area. So hopefully things will improve, but we can at least, for the worst case scenario, is $70 a ton, which would increase our budget around $10,000.
So the current sticker fee is $75 for 2 years, and we've been working with the Transportation and Recycling Committee to recommend $100 for 2 years, so a $25 increase, which would raise an additional $89,000 based on the stickers that were sold last year.
I mean, that seems to make sense to me. I mean, our costs are going up of doing it. It's still a great value.
It's basically $1 a week.
I mean, it's a great value for the usage, so I think it's a fact of life that those costs.
And we're still tremendously low on our sticker fees compared to the surrounding areas, but you know, a lot of it we're paying through taxes. Now we're putting it out to the consumers. So.
Yeah. So I'm fine with that increase, Pete.
I'm fine with it too.
Same as it does now per car. You pay per car.
I think there's a discount on the second car.
Second car is $25. and we would leave that. Yeah, no, we'd leave the second
It'll just
part.
be the initial
Yeah,
sticker
it's
price.
the initial sticker.
I think, if we've avoided, other towns have bag fees for every bag of trash you bring, and we've avoided a lot of things like that. I think it's a reasonable increase, yeah.
Any comments? Microphone, Chris. Come on.
Chris Potts. Are we getting charged for recyclables now with the change in the recycling, all the problems with recycling?
We've been getting charged for recycling over the years,
for a
but it's
while.
increased over three times as much now.
Yeah.
Like I said, $24 started at $24 a ton. It was 20, 22, 24. It was nominal increases last January, and then the market kind of crashed with the issue in China, and it went up to 50 to 60. Now we're at $70 a ton. So.
There was an interesting article again in the paper this morning about that as well, in terms of the whole issues wrapped around recycling, whether it's all going into a landfill anyway, or what. It's just something else to worry about. But
There's no, it always fascinating to me that single stream even works, because everything goes in. There's no performance incentives if you generate particularly high-grade recyclables.
So we have extremely clean recyclables compared to the general area.
Okay.
$70 a ton seems to be an expensive price at this time, but compared to other cities and towns, they're getting charged more. Some are doing better, but depends on how much tonnage you're actually giving.
Mm-hmm.
So because the contractor thinks of it as commodities, and when they sell it at the market, depending on the time and how much tonnage they're getting, they're making some money off of that as well. So.
Okay. So do we need a motion on
I
that?
think you need a motion
All right.
and a vote.
I move that we increase the 2-year transfer station sticker fee from $75 to $100 effective
We start selling them in April.
April.
For the coming year.
So April 2019.
The next sticker cycle.
Okay, next.
It'll actually be May 1st, but I do want to make an announcement right as I stand right here. We are going to go online starting May 1st, so everybody will be able to get their transfer station stickers online. We're going through the kind of logistics now, but everything seems to be working.
Would you prefer
properly.
to make that change May 1st? I'm thinking, I don't care, I'm just thinking, one, if we're going to a new method, that might be good. Number two, it gets announced at the town meeting and people know, and it's a clean break. I can see that might be less confusing that way.
That's fine.
So I amend my motion to have it be effective with the May 1st, as of May 1st.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Cemetery fee.
I move that amendment was not properly moved and seconded. So.
Cemetery fee.
So in January 7th of this past year, the Cemetery Commission met with us and approved our recommended fee increases for the cemetery. The cemetery fees have not increased in quite a while. Our staff did a great job of soliciting half a dozen other cities and towns around our area, including Walpole, Dover, Milford, Needham, and looked at all their prices. I have a kind of a long list here, but not everything's changed, just a few of the things, and the Cemetery Commission did agree to that it would be a proper change at this time.
Need a motion on that as well?
Yes.
Can you, so the increase in the cemetery fee is what? I didn't hear numbers there, I'm just.
So there's, I think you have this sheet here. There's only.
Not in front of me, Mo. Can you just tell us what
Sure.
the numbers are?
So some of the things that change is full burials from $500 to $700, double depth $750 to $1125, Saturday and Sunday burials. No, that stayed the same. I'm sorry. Winter rates from $75 to $150. Cremations, winter rate from $75 to $150. Disinterments, full burial disinterment from $500 to $2,000. We were very, very far behind a lot of the cities and towns in these areas here. The double depth burial disinterment from $750 to $3,000. Cremation disinterment 150 to 300. Columbarium disinterment, nope, just a winter rate 75 to 150. And then foundation markers, just a change to the installation for $55 each.
Well, can I ask you about the cost for the cemetery, the burial plot for 1,500?
Yep.
Because I always get concerned, because we're basically promising people perpetual care for $1,500, and as I always say, perpetual is a long time. And so I just
That
wonder
hasn't
if...
changed.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, are we charging enough? Are we charging the right
According
amount?
to this, according to the research our guys did, that it's for right now, it's sufficient, it's equal, it's around the same areas as the other cities and towns around us.
Okay, so that's one way of looking at it. The other way is, are we asking taxpayers in the future to cover the cost of that perpetual care? Or should we be selling these burial plots for enough money to basically create an endowment that'll take care of the care over the perpetuity?
Well, we can look at it further and, discuss
I think
with the
that'd be a
with the
good
commission.
discussion to have.
Mhm.
I would appreciate it if you would. Thank
Yep.
you.
So there's not a trust fund for the cemetery?
Currently have a microphone, sorry.
Yeah.
The town currently has a cemetery perpetual care trust fund. And that is where your $30,000 a year comes from to reduce the cemetery budget through its credits, the interest that it earns.
Do you think it's anywhere near close to the cost of running the cemetery? I mean, we've got 2 employees, so I'm not thinking that's...
Not if you look at the budget, the cemetery budget, no.
Yeah.
No, we're able to transfer $30,000 a year in the interest that it earns.
So I think that's just sort of a policy decision, whether we want to keep having the people in the future pay the cost of these burials in the past.
Something we can bring up.
Just trying to pull up quickly what the cemetery budget is this year. So it's
Cemetery, 196,
196,000.
284.
I mean, so if you're looking to you're talking about offsetting the full cost of the cemetery through the endowment on the burial plots? I mean,
It's just-
that would mean at least 6 times or 7 times the cost.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just I think it should be looked at. You don't want to make it confiscatory to buy a cemetery plot, but if we're going to take care of them forever.
Right. I mean, there's obviously a public benefit to the cemetery too.
Yes.
I mean, it's
We have a new section we haven't sold out of, but it's being surveyed and added to our GIS, so we're still working on that. So we're not sure what we have left over there, but.
And and you said, and forgive me, Mo, if you did say this, that our perpetual care amounts are also consistent with other towns?
Correct. And we kept them the same.
So I think if we look at it, to Pete's point, I think probably for next year,
Hmm.
We can look
next
at
year's budget,
Yeah,
so
not
just
this
take a
year.
look at what the remaining potential revenue
We'll
is.
discuss it with the cemetery commission and.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, it's obviously not something for this year, I don't think.
No.
So we could create an OPPEB, the post-employee benefits.
Post-internment?
Yeah, and Mo, the winter rates, that's a premium,
Yeah,
so that's added on to these.
Yes.
So if I was planning when to pass on, I wouldn't want to do it between November 1st and April 1st.
it's not that big of a.
I just wanted to make
an
sure.
increase, so.
No, it's going up, it's going up, I just.
I mean, just, do we do a lot of disinterments?
Not a lot.
Yeah.
Once in a while, but.
Ready for a motion?
I move that we approve the proposed increase in the cemetery rates as captured in the sheet that Mo provided us.
Second?
All in favor?
Yes.
All right, so the next thing is, and this is something that I've been working on with Christine and Georgia and Yvonne on the capital and reserves policy, because I think we had talked about at a meeting that we did not want to get in a situation where we were, $100,000 or $150,000 away from needing an override, and that we'd look at how much free cash we're using relative to the stabilization fund contribution. And so I don't know if you want to start, Christine or Yvonne or Georgia, with the overall approach. We kind of looked at it a couple of different ways. We had been looking at it I had done that reserves projection, a year or so ago when we were working on the policy. We had been looking at it against our goal for total reserves is a 9 to 12% goal. And we count as our reserve accounts essentially the SBAB, School Building Assistance Bureau account, free cash, and the stabilization fund. And so we'd been looking at it against 9%. To get it to 9% for this year is a challenge without some override or some significant cuts. So we looked at it with the floor we have under the policy is 7.5% for total reserves. And so one of the scenarios that we looked at was if we marked it against the floor, and I worked on this because obviously this is kind of a hobby horse of mine on our reserves, the floor of 7.5% combined with a larger contribution to the stabilization fund. So in other words, we would increase the usage of free cash. Part of the usage of that would be a larger stabilization fund contribution, which would set a higher baseline next year, because we are likely to have, given the number of unfilled positions we have in town this year, likely to have a lot of free cash next year. And so we would be compliant with the policy at the certification of free cash next year. I don't know, Yvonne or Georgia, do one of you want to take us through what we looked at, or no? Don't all jump up at once. Or Christine, do you want to?
So what we're looking into,
Do you
in
have
order,
another copy of the sheet?
I can make a copy real quick.
Well, go through it, and then we can see if you need
Okay.
a copy. Yeah.
And I'll let them jump in. So one of the things in going down to the 7.5% is that it will allow us to use more free cash for the budget. I don't have the updated numbers on my sheet. We're in the process of doing it today. It was 1.1. So we would come off, we've been holding at the 1.75 throughout the whole budget discussion. So we would come down from that, but we would be making additional contribution of $300,000 to the stabilization fund. And that would leave us with our total reserves at 7.5 versus 8.5, and we were shooting to try and get to 9 this year based on the budget policy.
Right, the goal, the 9% is not a year goal as to when to achieve
No.
that. That's sort of a target to move towards it.
Yeah, here's the part that I'm just not following. So we established a policy that we wanted to plan free cash balance not to be less than 1.75 million. We implemented it last year. This is letting that go down farther, but taking that money and putting it into the stabilization fund.
Mm-hmm.
How does that change our reserves?
So no,
Not
it would
counting free
use, it
cash?
would use some more free cash for the budget to close the gap in the budget than we had been carrying.
Yeah.
Per our discussion.
Yep.
But in an effort to continue to have some discipline towards this policy, we would make an additional free stabilization fund contribution, which raises your sort of permanent reserve baseline. Because the free cash is always going to fluctuate, right? I mean, the 1.75 that we came up with, I mean, it was an easy, not easy, but it was a straightforward way of kind of locking in a particular number. But obviously, that's going to go up and down, right? Your true reserves are what you have in stabilization and trust funds and all that kind of stuff. And so if you are recognizing that we would like to avoid an override if we can this year, and just like we like to avoid it everywhere, if we can move our permanent reserve higher as kind of it's a compromise between strict adherence to the numbers in the strict adherence to the baseline free cash number in the policy versus the overall reserve goal. You're still moving closer to getting to that 9% in the future by increasing your total stabilization fund contribution.
So one part of that sounds to me like we're just taking money from one bucket and putting in another bucket and saying, well, this is a better bucket for counting reserves, but it all counts as reserves. I guess I got to back us up. Last year, we adopted a policy that we would plan our budget to we would not plan for our free cash to drop below 1.75 million.
Mm-hmm.
I thought we did that as a good benchmark for where free cash as an asset that's free cash, that it funds the cash of the town. That was a logical and prudent and conservative level to set it at. Last year, we allowed that amount to drop by $500,000, and I was totally okay with that because we had just adopted the $1.75 million policy. So given the circumstances last year, I was okay with that. This year, we've had one discussion where I think you were on board with, well, if we were within $200,000 striking distance of a balance of a non-override budget, we'd be willing to compromise from 1.75 million down to 1.55.
Mhm.
And I said, well, I'd be willing to compromise
A little
as
more.
far down, yeah, but less than $500,000, so not down to one and a quarter million. It's got to be better than that because we're making progress toward getting to that free cash target. Now, when I talked to you two, what was it, last week or 2 weeks ago, there was some question about, given that we had adopted the policy on free cash, that kind of violating your own policy could hurt us at the time that we were getting ready to actually try to go out for a bond. My response to that was, well, we could do it this year because we're not going out for a bond, and it doesn't matter, and yet we would still hold that as our, we're still working toward that target. Here's my question. We adopted a policy last year, $1.75 million. We're now talking about not following that policy, and I don't really, one part of me doesn't care. You know, take $300,000 out of free cash and put it into reserves. If it makes you feel better, it floats your boat, that's okay. But then it seems to me we ought to be changing our policy around free cash.
Yeah, I think we want to look at that as well. I mean, I think there's two pieces kind of as we work through this policy for the first time, really, the first budget cycle, that we did, one thing we did not address in the policy was the measurement date for these targets, right? So we have the overall targets to meet, but we didn't say as of when, right? Is it in your projected budget? Is it in your audited financials? Is it, you know, and that was an oversight in putting it through. Like, are we saying, you know, when we get our audited financials each year, do we want the balance sheet to reflect this? And so that's the number, or do we want to have, you know, that's one thing we need to talk about. The second thing is whether we ought to build, to your point, more flexibility into the free cash number. In other words, given that, you know, from my view, I mean, towns have different approaches to free cash. And I still agree with the 1.75 as being a conservative approach. I don't think we should necessarily go to an override to keep that number simply because it's only a component of the reserve. So I had suggested the increased stabilization fund contribution as a recognition that if we are going to go against the policy or deviate from the policy for more operational spending in part, right? We would offset, so we'd sort of buy a plenary indulgence from that deviation from the policy by also making an extra contribution to the stabilization fund.
Okay, so I'm following so there's some amount, I'm just not following the concept. There's some amount of money that comes out of free cash, and that translates into an increased contribution to the stabilization fund of 300,000, did we say?
So 150 to
let me back you up.
Yeah.
Let me back you up before you get there, because this is not going to sing as a perfect concept, like a physics concept, right? So it's more kind of a good faith gesture than a precise logical syllogism, all right? So we need a certain amount of free cash to balance the budget without an override and without closing the library on Sundays and doing some other stuff we don't want to do, okay?
Sure.
For spending.
Okay.
One way to do it is to just deviate from the free cash policy, just do that additional spending and be at 1.5.
Yep.
I suggested, and again, this is that because the stabilization fund is also low relative to everything else, that we would, because there's not a huge difference between 1.5 million in free cash and 1.2 million, we would do, as you say, from 1.5 to 1.2, but it would go to stabilization.
1.75 to
So 1.75 to 1.5, that's the additional free cash you need for spending, for operations.
So we're gonna throw $250,000 out of free cash, that gets us down to the 1.5.
Right, and that's for operations. And so my thought was, well, let's also make an additional $300,000 contribution to stabilization, right? Because that's money, the good thing about stabilization as a reserve account is that it takes a 2/3 vote of town meeting to spend out of it, right? And so free cash is just a majority vote. And so any money that is in stabilization is safer from all of us than the free cash, right? And so part of the discipline of the capital, the reserves policy, is to prevent prevent us from just looking at the free cash as available to spend this year when it's not guaranteed to recur in the future, right? Because it's generated a lot of different ways. You don't always have control over how much you generate. And so this would put in, to quote, you know, Al Gore, sort of kind of a lockbox approach to a certain amount of that cash.
Okay, so Pete, you can weigh in. It's one point here, but let me react to that. First, if we want to take $250,000 out of the $1.75 million balance in free cash to apply to the budget, I can live with that. I'm okay with that. all in the spirit of us, at this point at least, having a $1.75 million target for our free cash in our budget. And I see this as moving us closer to that relative to last year, so I like it. That to me is totally separate and independent of taking $300,000 more out of free cash and reclassifying it as reserves. If we in fact are expecting to have a lot of money drop to free cash at the end of this year, I would rather see us take the $300,000 out of free cash next year when we have an excess budget. The reason that I would not automatically go along with what you're suggesting, and I'm not hard up on this one, but the reason I wouldn't is I actually like the fact that we have free cash that gives us some ability to buffer our budgets on an annual budgeting cycle. I wouldn't want it to be $7 million in free cash and we can take $3 million out one year and $2 million out the next year, but having a pool of money which does not require that kind of a reserve transfer, which we understand is our cash. It's our cash pot. And it allows us to kind of close the gap on annual funding. We know we just can't keep eating into it, but we can use that. I like the idea that we're giving ourselves $1.75 million plus every annual budget cycle to figure out what's the smartest thing to do, not just to use the money, but to figure out how we kind of close gaps when we need to close gaps. So the fact we're tying our hands and putting the money into a reserve, I think most of our money should go in the reserve, but it feels like it's just making it harder for us. And this is coming on the heels of a year where we've already started to nail down a bunch of policies, this one of which we actually haven't even fully implemented yet. So we're rationalizing how to get away from that policy, and then we're trying to do other things to tie our hands. We've moved our capital spending to the top of the sequence, which has pushed the pressure on the override onto the schools and the town budget. But what I'm getting at is we're tightening a lot of screws on this whole system all at once. And I like where we're going. I agree with the direction. But if we're going to do it, then we need to do it. We can't kind of do it and then we start rationalizing not do it so we can do something else somewhere else. I'm not hung up hard. So Pete, I'll throw this at you. If you think this is the right way to go, you know, it just means it's 2/3 vote to get the money back out again. It just feels to me like we're tying ourselves down in lots of directions at a time that I'd kind of like to think we have some flexibility on the free cash account. Not to just profligate spending, but to not have to sit there and gnaw on each other's ankles every budget cycle because there's no money to be had anywhere.
So I don't know the budgets as well as you two do, and so that, but to me, philosophically, I'm not bothered by trying to move the money into the stabilization and somehow having a higher threshold to get it out. But I guess what would help me is to see this out on paper instead of just what we're talking about here. But if we can avoid an override, that's certainly high on my priority list.
Can we run these scenarios and then next week we can have them
And then
on
you can have the
agenda
scenario.
for
Yep.
the way it's going to be laid out. I mean, I get what you're saying on that, Gus. I think part of what we're going to have to do to achieve, this is another discussion for post-town meeting, but we have talked from time to time about trying to look at some asset sales and all of that, which would generate additional revenue for these stabilization funds that would not come off the tax levy or otherwise. I think part of what we're trying to do is, I mean, recognizing, one, that our historical stabilization fund contributions were small relative to the need, particularly given the depletion of the School Building Assistance Bureau, right? That fund, which if you look back at 2015, when we last went out for a bond, I mean, that fund was substantial, our reserves were very high, but that has been depleted. And it's going to be depleted almost exactly in time for the next bond issue, right? And so, and probably depleted in time for the next recession too, right? Because partially what the stabilization fund is there for is if you have a recession-driven decrease in, you know, excise tax revenue, in building permits, and all the revenue that goes down in a recession, that ideally, if you've built up those reserves, you know, whether in free cash or in stabilization, you can take out of those funds, and that's why the investment community likes to see it, right? Because you're not in a situation where you have to have an override in the middle of a recession to make up for a drop in excise tax revenue and all the rest of it. And so part of my thinking on this too is that the economy is still pretty good now. And so we should be trying to move towards larger contributions to permanent reserves while the economy is good, I mean, the ratings agencies do like the 2/3 factor because it is a little more protected, right, from the year-to-year vagaries of it. Again, I'm not latching onto this either, but what I'm saying is if we're going to make a deviation from the policy, I would rather have it accompanied by, a deviation one that sort of lowers your reserves, but then a similar, again, it doesn't offset perfectly. I mean, it's an accounting issue. It's not as I said, it's not a perfect syllogism, but what it's showing, if you're looking at a track record of, in this particular year, yes, our free cash number came down, but sort of in good faith, we made it a larger stabilization fund contribution. Free cash went back up, and so your baseline amount is improving, right? Each year your reserves, because what's happening is, because the SBAB count is going down, we can't catch up entirely, right? It's going to take a while over time to offset that decline.
So this is a separate issue. I put the two of you on the spot based on the conversation we had together a week ago. There's this one thing we're doing around, contributing to our operating budgets and then offsetting that with an additional contribution to our stabilization fund, and it looks, to me, I'm looking saying, well, that actually looks like we're going backwards, because last year we did $500,000. We were at like $1.25 million, if I recall correctly. This would actually put us down below $1.25 million. We'd be at 1.2.
No.
Where were we last year?
1.5, 1.4 of free cash.
Well, after we took the money out, that's
We didn't do this policy to keep any free cash on hand last year. We didn't sign the policy till July.
No,
so
I
this
get
is the
that,
first one.
but we had the conversations, the fact we didn't sign it, we had this conversation going into town meeting. We had talked about $1.75 million, and then we deliberately, given the strain of trying to get to a non-override budget, we deliberately tapped that and agreed to go below that $1.75 million target. I was thinking we did it to $500,000, but I could be wrong.
I don't remember off the top of my head. I don't have that in front of me.
So, anyway, the basic point I'm making is, whatever that number was, I would feel better if we weren't driving it down below that number in the second year, that we haven't implemented the policy we've adopted. So that's numerically the thing I'm reacting to. But the other issue that you all brought up to me last week, and Mike, I'm pretty sure you're referring to it with the assistance fund, is quite aside from where we put money relative to free cash and stabilization fund, we also are anticipating that when we need to go out and look for funding for the school, we're going to have a reserve that's built up well above where we are right now, and we don't have the additional contribution of the school building account to do that. So that, to me, is a separate issue that says we need to find a way, we're in agreement kind of directionally here, we need to find a way to start throwing more money into our stabilization fund, because by the time we need to go out for funding for the schools, we need to have a good solid base there that gives us, gives us the reserves that will get us the right funding. To me, that's actually, I think, a bigger problem, and it's
Isn't that what we were just talking about?
Yeah, that's what we just said.
Well,
we just said that.
I thought it was the exact conversation we were just having about
I don't
bigger
know.
contribution to the stabilization fund.
but wait a minute, where's the money coming from? If the money's coming out of free cash counts toward how people look at our accounting. So if we take $300,000 out of free cash, put it in stabilization, we haven't done anything to improve our overall reserve
It's
status.
over a year. The thing is, the free cash fluctuates.
Yeah.
Right, so you fix the 1.75 million as the policy. It may actually go over that, and then you would take the overage, right?
Yeah.
So if you took the overage and moved that to stabilization, that would increase your total reserve. So you're correct that moving $300,000 from free cash to stabilization in this year does not have effect on your bottom line reserves. Next year it does, because you've increased the baseline of the stabilization fund, and free cash has gone up because new free cash has been generated. Right, so if your stabilization fund would be 1.6 million, you make it 1.9 million instead. You take free cash down to 1.2, but then because of all the turnbacks that are going to happen, because we have so many unfilled jobs this year, then free cash will go up to 2 million. Right, so instead of adding 1.6 million to 2, you're adding 1.9 million to 2.
That's why you're a lawyer. You're wearing me down just because I can't follow you there. So,
Transition year.
Yeah. No, but let me see if I understood what you said. We had a policy that said, for planning purposes in our budget, we would hold projected free cash balance at $1.75 million. We are now talking about, in our budget, planning a free cash balance of $1.2 million, and accounting 300K of that is going into a stabilization fund, but we aren't really going to take our free cash down to 1.2 million because we know that there's money dropping into free cash, and it'll be the overage above the 1.75 million that's actually going to give us the 300K that we want to put in this year into the stabilization fund. Is that what the story is here?
Yeah, it depends on the measurement date. In other words, like when we're looking at this policy, because not all these things happen at the same time, right? So like, Georgia, if we appropriate, when we appropriate money into the stabilization fund, when does the cash go into the stabilization fund? Over the course of the fiscal year. Upon certification. So right, that all happens at next January, effectively. Right, so next January, so right now we're looking at the amount we have in free cash now, certified as of past January, right? So that's what we're looking at right now. And so when we say we talk taking free cash down, it's going from the amount certified in January of 2019 less the amount we're proposing to spend, correct? Mm-hmm. Right? So that means from now until, but really that doesn't get spent until next January.
Technically,
right? So the cash doesn't actually move until next January. And so when you actually do it, the amount of free cash we've taken out of our account to move to stabilization, it all happens next January. And so if you actually will, the way it will work is it's the amount that closes the free cash in January plus the amount we transfer to stabilization. So if we're right, and there's going to be lots more free cash coming in, actually as of next January, we'll be compliant with the policy by doing it this way. Fair?
The dates definitely have to be. We have to put the dates in.
Yeah, that's I think the disconnect is that it, on an accounting basis and a projection basis, yes, it's gone down, but it actually hasn't gone down because the transfers don't happen until you certify the free cash for next year.
Yeah, well, I understand why an accountant would like to tie our hands. As a selectman, I'd rather not have my hands tied more than they need to be. I'm not trying to get big surpluses, but you can wrap yourself around. If anybody who runs their checkbook down at less than $400, and then you get monthly bills, and you try to not bounce your checkbook, you can know how much time you waste just trying to work timing and stuff. And I don't want to go there. So here's the story I think I hear. We have a policy that says the free cash balance should not be planned to go below $1.75 million. Mm-hmm. We are proposing to take 550,000 of that, apply 250,000 toward the overall budget, operating budgets. Mm-hmm. Take 300,000, put it into the reserves. Mm-hmm. That looks like we've taken that $1.75 million policy and we're accepting a $1.2 million planning balance in our free cash. But what you're telling me is, and I'm not saying that in a derogatory way, what you're telling me is that we have good reason to believe that there will be an above average amount of free cash dropping into our free cash in the coming year. So even though the accounting for the free cash balance suggests it's 1.2 million, we know that it will be much higher than that as a practical matter because the real money is going to be coming in. And in fact, I think there's even some free cash that drops from last year's budget because of the mechanics on the override versus the other. So we even know what some of that is. And we are confident that that total amount that drops will leave us with a free cash balance next January in excess of $1.75 million. That's the story, I think.
And we feel comfortable knowing that
all feel comfortable that that's going to all happen. Therefore, although we aren't exactly adhering to the letter of our policy, we are, for purposes of transition when we need to be more creative about how to think about it, are accepting the spirit of the policy that we will achieve that because of the fortuitous things we are thoroughly expecting to have come in.
And because of the history, I mean, as you know, of generating free cash, right? I mean, historically, we used to always have, there was that last article that was $500,000 that kind of recycled through. We went through a period of time of using more free cash, right? Now, we generated a lot of free cash too, right? So we used more, we generated more. The balance at one point it was as high as 2.8.
2.8.
Right? 2.8 is probably the high water mark of late.
That $500,000 in free cash that we pull out every year, the way I look at it from a budgetary standpoint, is that's $500,000 that we provide across our departments as a reserve, as a management reserve on all their budgets. So rather than beating ourselves silly like virtually any other organization I've ever worked with does, to try to pare everybody down to the last penny, and then everybody has to scrape to get the last, this one town somehow or another culturally has the discipline that says if you don't need to spend the money, don't spend it, give it back to us, and then you can count on us not sitting there screwing you down tight on all the budgets next year, because we'll trust you to use the money responsibly. And for some unexplainable reason in this town, it's the only organization I've ever run across, we have that discipline, we have that culture, and the free cash keeps flowing through, and it probably comes from different departments every year because different departments don't need it. But it works, so I kind of like that. I can't explain it, I like it.
So let me come at this a different way.
Okay.
Right, when we originally did the budget to hold it at 1.75, we essentially zeroed out that 500, correct?
Yes.
Right, so
Yeah.
what I'm proposing would restore that 500 that we had, but we'd be splitting it, in this way of thinking between some operations and some stabilization.
And
Fair,
we felt,
Georgia? Is that
I
a
think
fair?
that's fair. And then we felt that the goal of the policy, which states 9 to 12, but would never fall less than 7.5, we felt the transition year for the first year, we could meet the 7.5, doing everything we've explained tonight.
And we expect if we were to amend the policy to make the measurement date upon certification of free cash, we reasonably anticipate if you measure that in January of 2020, it'll be compliant with those numbers.
Well,
Fair?
we were both willing
run
to,
scenarios for that.
throw 250,000 at operating budgets that would have been in violation of the 1.75. I personally don't have strong concerns of taking the other 300,000 if we put it in stabilization. From a fiscal prudence standpoint, I don't have any problem. I currently have a minor problem about tying our hands, but we're assured that there's a lot of free cash coming in, so that won't happen. I'm willing to run this experiment for the next year, sure. Why not?
I think the free cash will come in at the end of the fiscal year that we're in. Keep in mind, in fiscal year 20, if you're making the budget cuts, you may not have that much coming in to go into fiscal year 21.
All right.
Fiscal year 23, you lose $1.1 million, and that's we don't have already money. That's going to be the tightest year. You're going to be short $1.1 million off of that.
Right. So this would at least lock in a larger stabilization fund contribution to the budget for this year. Hopefully, we can generate some revenue on top of, tax revenue, whatnot, to get into, to juice that stabilization fund. It would be a great goal if that $1.1 million, if through asset sales, we were able to close that $1.1 million gap in the SBAB for fiscal year 2023 over the next 3 or 4 years.
All right,
So we'll run some scenarios and have them for you for your meeting on Tuesday.
I look forward to it.
Me too. All right, anything else on budget, numbers?
I think that was all we had for this
That's all we
evening.
had for numbers. Anything else anybody else has? All right, Mr. Sweeney.
Yes, sir.
No, microphone.
I don't need one.
But if the people at home are gonna
Listening
hear
to it.
your dulcet tones, Tom, you have to have the microphone.
So one question I have, town meeting when it comes up, I hope you're going to have the school committee there at the same time explaining their budget out. Because I think it's most important that the people at town meeting understand how the whole budget is derived. It's very important, because if you don't do that, I can see override coming.
They will be there, and we are trying to avoid an override.
Explain it out.
I can't promise they'll explain anything, but they will be there.
I'm guaranteed, because I'll ask the question why they're not.
There you go.
And Tom, we have plans, it'll probably be in April, but we will be, if you, I don't know if you, I can't remember whether you came to the information sessions that we ran before the election last year. We want to run at least 2 of those sessions prior to the town meeting this year, still at the COA. The point will be to give anybody who's interested a chance to see the budget and understand the budget, and that's the full budget. It's not the,
That's the seniors, I'm
Yeah.
not worried about that.
it's not just the senior, anybody can come.
That's right.
We're just holding it there.
I think it's important that they do it at town meeting to know what the hell they're voting on. If they're voting on, here we go, if you don't know this, we gotta go override, so we gotta go back, come up again for the override vote. So, that's important. You want taxes to go out from time, you want, a whole bit, but if you're gonna get by override, you wanna know it upfront.
Duly noted. Thank you, Tom. All right, do we have a motion? I think we're done with everything
You
else.
close the warrant?
Motion to close the warrant?
I move that we close the warrant.
Second.
All in favor?
Yep.
Aye. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
I move that we adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Yep.
Aye. Thank you, everybody.